Jon Snow stood at the highest rampart of Winterfell's great walls, the biting northern wind raking across his cheeks. He shut his eyes for a moment and tried to summon a sense of peace that had long eluded him. The courtyard beneath him bustled with new recruits training at wooden dummies, and the acrid smell of the forge drifted upward, reminding him of that relentless tide called life. It pressed on, even in the face of war and terror and prophecy. So much had changed since he had first arrived at the Wall, back when he was just a bitter young bastard of Winterfell, eager to prove his worth to the Night's Watch and to himself. Now, after all the secrets and all the revelations, after Bran and Sam had spilled truths that felt like knives scraping along a brittle bone, Jon found himself poised on the edge of something momentous. He was supposed to be Aegon Targaryen. He was supposed to be a king, if the realm willed it, by virtue of blood and destiny. He was supposed to claim a birthright he had never known, which had cost his father and mother their lives. He was supposed to be so many things, but as he tightened his gloved fingers around the cold stone of Winterfell's wall, he felt nothing but the old, familiar sense of himself, the Stark bastard. Sometimes he could still picture Bran's distant, eerie gaze, the look in his half-brother's eyes, a blend of sorrow and inevitability, when he had shared the secret. He could still hear Sam's trembling voice, heavy with conviction and loyalty, as the words tumbled out. Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark were Jon's true parents. The Targaryen blood in his veins made him an heir to the Iron Throne. Jon remembered the shock, the indignation, the swirling confusion that had consumed him. How could that be? He who had served in the Night's Watch, who had died and been resurrected, who had fought for the living against the undead. He was the legitimate child of the last Targaryen prince and Ned Stark's sister. But even as his mind spun, as the truth threatened to topple the pillars of his identity, he felt no urge to wear the Targaryen name. He felt no pull to the dragons, no thirst to claim King's Landing or the seat of power that lay at the heart of the realm. All he felt was longing for the Stark name, the name that had shaped his entire life, from the broad courtyard of Winterfell to the frigid emptiness of the Wall. He had always hungered for recognition from his supposed father, Eddard Stark, even if that recognition could never be fully given. It was the North he loved, the North he fought for, and the North he would die for again if needed. He had come to learn that his father, and Ned Stark would always be his father, no matter what flesh and blood might decree, had protected him with a lie. Ned had sacrificed his honor in the world's eyes to shield Jon from Robert Baratheon's hatred. From that moment forward, Jon's entire sense of identity was layered with the knowledge of that paternal devotion. How could he cast it aside now, just because of the swirl of Targaryen blood in his veins? He turned away from the wall and made his way down the winding steps, his cloak flapping behind him. Every footstep echoed in the stone passages. He could hear distant voices, serious, urgent, and he knew it was time to face them again. Sansa, Arya, Davos, and even the few lords of the North who remained. They were all looking to him for decisions, to continue forging alliances in the wake of the war against the Night King. Winterfell was still battered from that great battle, though the breach in the walls had been repaired and the scars on the courtyard scrubbed clean of most of the dark blood. The entire realm had suffered during the long night, but in the North the cost had been immense. When he entered the great hall, the flames in the massive hearth flickered with an orange glow that almost seemed warm despite the tension in the air. Long tables were sparsely occupied with the last remnants of the day's meal. On a dais near Ned Stark's old high seat stood Sansa, her gown a deep gray trimmed in white fur, her red hair pinned back modestly. She looked proud and fierce, a woman who had suffered so much and emerged with steel in her spine. Arya was seated at a table nearby, leaning forward, her eyes as sharp as any dagger. She spotted Jon immediately and gave the slightest tilt of her head. Davos hovered to one side, concern etched across his weathered face. Sansa's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it weren't shadowed by worry. "Jon," she said quietly. He took in the hush that followed his entrance. All conversation died as soon as the North's men, and any man in this hall, caught sight of him. The secret of his parentage had not spread widely, but in the corridors of Winterfell, rumors always blossomed. People spoke about regal, the green dragon he had once ridden, about how the creature had accepted him as if it could sense the Targaryen blood. Jon had only done so in desperate necessity, to help Daenerys fight the Night King's army. Afterward, he'd dismounted and never sought to mount the dragon again. It had felt wrong, unnatural, disloyal to the memory of the man who raised him. He had done it because they needed every advantage in that fight. That was all. Sansa cleared her throat. We were discussing the aftermath of the war against the dead and how best to sustain Winterfell through these coming months. Many have died. The harvest was disrupted. We need to open trade routes to the south. He nodded, moving forward. What do you need from me? The question was deceptively simple. His sister's eyes flicked toward a handful of northern lords who stood near the center of the hall. Some wore furs and patched leathers that had seen better days. Lord Glover was among them, posture stiff, eyes calculating. Lady Mormont was gone. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, remembering her bravery. So many ghosts. We need coin, Sansa said. If we are to rebuild, supply seeds for the next planting, and ensure we don't starve next winter, we have to negotiate assistance. The Vale can help, but their new regent is cautious. We'll have to send envoys. The Riverlands might be an option as well. Lady Brienne is forging some ties with Edmure Tully, but we'll see how that goes. The real question is King's Landing. Jon winced at the name. King's Landing was no longer in the grip of Cersei. Daenerys Targaryen had taken the Iron Throne after a horrifying battle that saw fire rain down upon the city. That memory still cast a cold shadow across his heart, because he had witnessed the rage and devastation unleashed by dragons. So many innocents lost in the madness. Yet Daenerys had emerged victorious, battered by the weight of her own fury and heartbreak. In the aftermath, she had turned west to face the true threat of the dead, forging a precarious alliance with Jon once more, hoping for redemption in victory. They had fought side by side in the north. She had bled for him for the living. Even then, tensions between them had never fully settled. She saw him as a rightful claimant to a throne she believed was hers alone. When the dust settled and the Night King was undone, the realm was left in a tense hush, uncertain which Targaryen to follow, if any. Jon had answered that question by turning away from the Targaryen name entirely. When Daenerys had demanded his acknowledgement, he had told her, quietly, that he was no dragon, that his vow was to the north. She had stared at him with heartbreak, with anger, with desperation, but he had refused. Since then, Daenerys remained in King's Landing, uncertain of her next steps, uncertain of how to treat Jon Snow, the man she had loved, or thought she loved, who also bore the blood of dragons but refused to wear that mantle. Sansa's gaze met his. If we are to trade with the crown, we need official talks. Winterfell can't stand without help. We have wounded men, burned fields. Some want you to go to King's Landing and parley. Others think we should break from the Iron Throne once and for all. Silence, heavy and immediate, followed her words. Jon felt the weight of them like a physical burden. If he refused the Targaryen claim, if he bent no knee and declared the North's independence, where did that leave them with the crown? Would Daenerys consider Winterfell an open rebellion, or would she allow them a peaceful withdrawal, driven by her old affections for him? This was not the same Daenerys who had first come to Westeros. The war and the losses had changed her. Whether it had made her kinder or more vengeful was still an open question. He took a steadying breath. I'll send an envoy, but I won't go myself, not yet. The North is still recovering. I won't leave you now. Sansa's eyes flickered with relief. She parted her lips to speak, but Lord Glover, his jaw set in a grim line, stepped forward. I've pledged men. I've lost men. All for this war and for House Stark, he said. But the Targaryen queen has blood on her hands. We hear rumors of the city she destroyed. 1 million souls once lived in King's Landing, and many died beneath dragon flame. Is that who we want to trade with? That's madness. Arya stood, her expression dispassionate. Winterfell needs food. Winterfell needs coin. The war is done. We won it with her help. Remember that. Her tone was lethal but quiet, and even Glover flinched. She had reason for everything she did. Lord Glover glared. Burning innocence is no reason. You Stark girls might have grown up, but I'll not feed my men's families on the illusions of a mad Targaryen. Then, realizing the weight of his defiance, he stared uncertainly at Jon, whose face had grown ashen. Jon inhaled a shuddering breath, reminding himself that he had made his choice. He was no Targaryen. He would not champion Daenerys or cast her aside. He would only act as the bastard of Winterfell, the man whose loyalty lay with the North. We're not praising or condemning her, he said in a measured tone. But we need to negotiate with her if we want a peaceful realm. If we want our people to have a future. A reluctant murmur rippled among the lords. Sansa closed her eyes for a moment, as if she, too, felt the pinch of these impossible decisions. Arya eased back, returning to her seat. Davos cleared his throat. So who will we send, then, if not yourself? We need someone who can speak on behalf of the North but won't incite Daenerys' wrath. He didn't say it aloud, but Jon knew what Davos was implying. Daenerys' feelings for Jon were complicated at best. Sending him might soothe her or enrage her. By refusing his Targaryen birthright, Jon had in her eyes refused her as well. He had wondered sometimes if the love they once shared was genuine, or if it was stoked by the knowledge of his heritage, her hunger for alliance, and the swirl of destiny around them. He had decided it didn't matter. For him, love demanded he remain who he was, not become something else. Jon spoke softly. I think we should send Tyrion. The hush that settled was immediate and sharp. Sansa's brows lifted in surprise. Arya blinked, her lips quirking with faint curiosity. Davos looked pensive. Lord Glover spat. The imp? That Lannister? Hasn't he fled or turned traitor or who knows what side he's on? It was a fair objection. Tyrion Lannister was last known to be in Winterfell, having survived the Great War. He had lost his queen's trust at one point after repeated failures in strategy. Yet he had remained grimly determined, saying he had nowhere else to go. Since the victory over the dead, Tyrion had drifted like a specter through Winterfell, sometimes offering sardonic advice, other times simply drinking in lonely corners. He was her hand, Jon said. If anyone can parley with her, it's him. She might be angry, she might be distrustful. But if we send someone she knows, someone who can speak her language, she might be more inclined to open trade routes. He's a southerner, but he fought beside us. He chose us in the end. Sansa cast a long, thoughtful glance at Jon. The tension between them was an old wound, but they had learned to value each other's counsel. After a moment, she inclined her head. Very well, we shall speak with him. If he agrees, we'll send him south with an escort. If he succeeds, the North will have what it needs to survive the next winter. If not, we'll look elsewhere. With that, the meeting concluded, lords and soldiers dispersing to resume their duties, leaving only Jon, Sansa, Arya, and Davos standing together near the warm glow of the hearth. A hush fell among them, and for a long time no one spoke. Jon could read the swirl of thoughts in Sansa's face. She knew sending Tyrion to speak with Daenerys might risk all sorts of complications. Arya, as always, was unreadable, though she watched Jon with the slight tilt of her head that suggested she had an opinion. Finally, Davos broke the silence. It's not a bad idea. He's cunning, knows how to talk his way through difficulties. Let us hope it's enough. Sansa frowned. We should speak to him soon and settle the details. King's Landing is far, and who knows what welcomes him there. Jon merely nodded. He was so tired. The responsibilities of leadership weighed on him like a millstone around his neck. He had sought to shirk them when he gave up his crown and bent the knee to Daenerys initially, back when he thought her presence in the North was their best chance against the undead. Yet the North looked to him still, especially after he rose from death. It was as if the old gods had chosen him specifically to bear the burdens that no one else could. But he only felt weariness and longing for simpler days that would never come again. That night, after the hall had emptied and the torches in the corridors had been snuffed, Jon stood before the statue of Ned Stark in the crypts beneath Winterfell. A single torch cast flickering shadows across his father's stone face. He recalled the 1,000 times he had ventured here in his youth, desperate to feel some tie to his lineage. He remembered kneeling at the foot of the statue after he first learned the truth of his birth, as if trying to make sense of the betrayal he felt. But in time he had come to realize it was no betrayal at all. Ned Stark had protected him. He had sacrificed his own honor. He had taught Jon to be a man of principle, a man of duty, not by words alone but through actions, through silent devotion. Jon spoke softly, his breath ghosting over the torch flame. "You never told me, and I'm glad. If I had known as a boy, what would I have done with it?" He let out a bitter, low laugh. "I would have grown up convinced I was something special. Perhaps I would have wanted to claim the Iron Throne, or at least believed I had to. I never wanted it. I still don't. But the realm wants a savior or they want a scapegoat. People always want something. And I find myself lost, wondering what I am now." The crypts offered no reply but the faint drip of water along the cold stone floor. Jon closed his eyes and bowed his head. He recalled the dream he sometimes had, of the snow-laden courtyard of Winterfell, of Ned's voice calling him to spar with Robb. In those dreams he was always the bastard, and that was enough. How strange that now, with the weight of a Targaryen legacy pressing on him, he still longed to be only that, a simple snow. He left the crypts and stepped back into the biting cold of the courtyard. Tomorrow they would speak to Tyrion. Tomorrow he might send the dwarf south in hopes of forging a fragile peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for tonight, he breathed the sharp northern air, letting the chill settle into his bones, and prayed the old gods would guide him. Morning found him in the council chamber, a small, wood-paneled room where a large table dominated the center. Tyrion was there, newly summoned, looking more sober than usual. His hair had grown slightly disheveled, streaks of gray more apparent now. He sipped from a cup of watered wine, as if he had forced himself to moderation. A man who had witnessed too many tragedies in too few years. Sansa stood at the table's head, her hands clasped before her, while Arya leaned against the wall, arms folded, regarding Tyrion with an inscrutable expression. Jon wasted no time. "Tyrion, we need someone to go to King's Landing and speak with Daenerys about opening trade routes, sending supplies. We're vulnerable. Are you willing to go?" Tyrion raised his brows, the ghost of a sardonic smile tugging at his lips. "You want to send me, of all people, to the woman who might be less than pleased with how I performed my duties as her hand? I recall she threatened to burn me alive on at least one occasion, perhaps more than once. But you want me to trot into her presence and request aid?" He shook his head, but there was no real malice in his tone. It was more like a man acknowledging a cosmic joke. "I suppose it's no more suicidal than half the things I've done in my life." Sansa cleared her throat. "We realize the dangers, but you know her best. You were close to her for years. You might still appeal to her reason, or her heart, if she has any left. She understands the necessity of alliance. We've all faced the end of the world together." Tyrion looked at Jon, scrutinizing him. "And why do you not go yourself, your grace?" The question was pointed, there was no sarcasm in the title. Tyrion had never been comfortable with the swirling rumors of Jon's Targaryen claim, but he knew well enough that Jon was as good as a king in the north, if not officially recognized as one. Jon swallowed. "Because she doesn't need another Targaryen. She needs reason, and it's complicated between us. I'm not sure I'd help the cause if I walked into the Red Keep. She might see my presence as a threat, or a distraction, or something else altogether." Tyrion's eyes flicked to Sansa. "And you? You'd prefer to remain in the north as well?" Sansa nodded curtly. "I'll not risk the north's stability by leaving. My place is here. My people need me." Tyrion sighed, glancing at Arya, who returned his look with cool detachment. Then the dwarf closed his eyes briefly, took another sip of wine, and nodded. "So be it. I will go. I'll need a small retinue, not too large to appear threatening, but not so small that I'm an easy target for bandits. I'll also need some gold to grease the right palms on the journey. The roads are not as secure as they once were." "We'll provide it," Jon said. "Thank you." The dwarf shrugged. "I always did enjoy risking my neck for lost causes. And the cause of trade between North and South, in the midst of Targaryen suspicions and Northern resentments. That's about as lost as they come. But I'll do my best." Plans were quickly laid. Within days, Tyrion and a modest retinue of 10 men prepared to depart Winterfell. Jon stood by the gates to see them off, the cold winter sun reflecting off the patchy snow. The men in the retinue were a mix of northern spearmen and a few archers, led by a grizzled captain named Rowan, who had survived both the Battle of Winterfell against the dead and the final battles in the south. Tyrion was bundled in a heavy fur cloak, grimacing with each gust of icy wind. "I've never gotten used to the cold here," the dwarf muttered. "One would think after all I've endured, a bit of cold wouldn't bother me. But no, I'm still a Lannister by birth. We are creatures of milder climates." Jon offered him a tight smile. "Safe travels. When you speak to Daenerys, make it clear we want no war, no conflict. We only want to rebuild." Tyrion's voice was subdued, lacking his usual wit. She always did care for the small folk in her own way. Her dream of breaking the wheel meant something to her once. "I'll remind her of that." Jon nodded. He wanted to say so many things. How he still cared for her, how he bore no ill will, how he wished all had turned out differently. But those words might not matter, might not help, and might even complicate Tyrion's task. In the end, all Jon said was, "The gods go with you." Tyrion mounted a stout, dark pony, and the retinue rode out. The gates shut behind them, and Jon stared at the ice-crusted road for a long while before turning to make his way back into Winterfell's courtyard, where more pressing duties awaited. As the days stretched into weeks, Jon kept himself busy with the daily toil of leading a war-ravaged north. He oversaw repairs to watchtowers, organized the gleaning of whatever grain remained in the fields, and instructed the forging of new tools for farmers so that the fields could be replanted as soon as spring allowed. Wolves roamed the forests in greater numbers these days, perhaps drawn by the sense of death and chaos. Sentries along the outer roads reported more banditry than usual. Jon arranged patrols to keep the roads safe. He listened to disputes between petty lords, attempted to quell old grudges that had flared up in the power vacuum left by the war. It was a life of ceaseless burden, but it grounded him. It reminded him that he was, at heart, a Stark. Late one afternoon, Jon found himself at the archery range with Arya. She loosed arrow after arrow, each one thudding into the target with unnerving precision. Her face was impassive, but Jon could see the tension in her stance. After she emptied her quiver, he handed her more arrows, and she continued without a word. Finally, he said quietly, "You're troubled." She exhaled, the steam from her lips fading into the cold air. "I always am," she said. She lowered her bow, turned to face him. "We've all lost so much. I can still see the dead flooding Winterfell, see the eyes of those I used to know. But that's not why I'm troubled now." "Then what is it?" She hesitated. "We're Starks. I've wanted to be nothing else, despite all my travels and transformations. Though you carry Targaryen blood. I know you've chosen to deny it, to remain who you are, but do you ever wonder if that decision might come back to haunt us?" Jon felt a knot form in his chest. "I wonder every day," he admitted. "I can't claim that name, Arya. I can't be that person. But perhaps it will haunt us anyway." She gazed at him, her gray eyes flickering with faint warmth. "I don't care about your blood. You're my brother. If this realm tears itself apart because of lines of succession, let them. We'll protect our own. Just be ready. People who crave power won't forget what you are." He nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Arya's instincts for danger were rarely wrong. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped away to let her resume her archery. Her arrows flew true, each strike a testament to her unwavering skill and determination. Word from Tyrion took longer than Jon expected. Nearly 2 months passed with no raven, no message. The snows had eased somewhat, giving way to the subtle changes that heralded the earliest signs of spring. Patches of earth peeked through the retreating drifts. The sky, once perpetually gray, grew lighter some days, and then, finally, a raven arrived. The seal it bore was the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Jon's stomach clenched at the sight. He read the letter in the privacy of his solar. The writing was Tyrion's, but it was terse, lacking his usual flair for cleverness. He had reached King's Landing, it said. Daenerys had received him with cautious courtesy. Her ruling council was sparse. Grey Worm led her unsullied, and some remnants of her advisors had reassembled. But the atmosphere in the capital was tense. The city was still rebuilding from the devastation of Dragonfire. According to Tyrion, Daenerys was willing to consider trade agreements with the North under certain conditions. She demanded formal recognition of her sovereignty as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and she wanted Jon to come to King's Landing to finalize any treaty. Tyrion did not mention any threat or ultimatum, only that Daenerys was insistent that Jon must speak with her in person to seal any arrangement. Jon felt as though his body were made of lead. Of course she would want that. If the bastard of Winterfell, rumored to be a Targaryen, refused to pledge fealty, she might see it as an open rebellion or an affront. But she had not demanded his head. She asked for a meeting. He read the letter again, looking for hidden meanings, but Tyrion's words were careful and neutral, perhaps too neutral. In the end, Jon found himself at a crossroads he had desperately hoped to avoid. He wasted no time calling a meeting in the Great Hall with Sansa, Arya, Davos, and the principal Northern Lords. The letter was read aloud, and hushed conversations sprang up like fire catching kindling. Some lords demanded defiance, proclaiming that the North should declare its full independence. Others suggested sending a diplomatic envoy of lesser status than Jon. But in the swirl of arguments, it was Sansa who looked Jon in the eye and spoke calmly over the din. "She wants to see you," Sansa said, her voice unwavering. "If we refuse, do we risk open war again? Are we prepared for that? Our men are barely recovered from the last battles. Our fields are burnt, our coffers thin. You know the cost. And if she's truly open to negotiation, this might be our best chance for peace, especially for the small folk." Arya listened, arms crossed. Finally, she added, "I don't like sending you there. Could be a trap. Or it could be worse. You might decide to do something foolish to appease her. We don't need another war, but we also don't need a Targaryen's leash around our necks." Jon looked at them, at the men and women who had fought for him, who had lived through unspeakable horrors. He knew the realm teetered on the brink of a new era. Daenerys might intend to rule justly, or she might follow in her father's footsteps toward madness. But refusing her request was to spit on the tenuous peace. He realized then that the North's best chance at survival lay in forging some kind of relationship with the Queen on the Iron Throne, even if that meant traveling south to face the ghosts of his destiny. He allowed the lords and ladies to argue themselves out, listened to their concerns. Finally, he spoke. "I'll go. I'll speak with her. I won't bend the knee, not unless she proves to me she's changed from the Queen who burned King's Landing. But I'll hear her terms, and I'll do what I must for the North. That's my duty." The hall was silent for a moment. Then slowly, one by one, the Northern Lords bowed their heads in acceptance. Arya's mouth pressed into a thin line, and Sansa's eyes shone with something akin to both worry and admiration. Jon looked at Davos, who gave a grim nod. It was decided. Preparations for the journey were swift. Jon chose a modest entourage. Davos would accompany him, along with a dozen well-armed riders, including a few knights from the Vale who had pledged themselves to the Starks during the Great War. He left Sansa as regent in Winterfell, with Arya as her chief protector and advisor. Before departing, Jon walked the ramparts again, breathing in the cold northern air as if memorizing it. This was his home, and no matter what the blood in his veins said, it always would be. The journey south was stark and sobering. The devastation left by the undead and the wars that followed was still evident. Villages lay half-burned or abandoned. Ravens circled overhead, picking at what scraps remained. At the same time, Jon saw pockets of regrowth. Spring's faint thaw allowed tiny green shoots to appear in churned-up soil. Children, grimy but alive, peeked out from behind huddled parents as the northern band passed. Occasionally, Jon and Davos would speak with local folk, offering what meager supplies they could spare from their saddlebags. In these moments, Jon was reminded why he had chosen to deny any claim to the throne. The realm needed shepherds, not another power-hungry monarch. He was content to do what he could in small ways for the people who still survived. They met no resistance on the roads, though tension bristled each time they passed a band of unsullied soldiers patrolling. The columns of gray-clad warriors moved with disciplined efficiency, a reminder that Daenerys Targaryen's might was still very much alive. When Jon glimpsed the sprawl of kings landing from a hilltop, his heart twisted. The city's walls were partially scorched, and inside, the silhouette of the Red Keep showed signs of reconstruction. Great swathes of the city beyond the keep were still in ruins, blackened by dragonfire. Smoke drifted lazily from these districts, though some areas bustled with signs of rebuilding. The approach to the capital was under tight watch. Unsullied guards halted Jon's entourage at the main gates, their spears crossed in a silent warning. Davos produced the royal writ that Tyrion had sent. One of the Unsullied read it, emotionless, then nodded and motioned for them to follow. Jon tried not to stare at the battered populace lining the streets. Some recognized him, or at least recognized the sigil of the Stark banner. Their faces were a blend of awe and fear and curiosity. Others glared with resentful suspicion. At the Red Keep, Jon was taken aback by the changes. Gone were many of the ostentatious Lannister decorations. The Targaryen sigil was now visible in key places, but he also saw a distinct emphasis on plain practicality. Entire wings were under construction, filled with workers scurrying about. Davos whistled softly at the sight. "She's rebuilding," he murmured. "Her way." An unsullied officer led Jon and Davos to the throne room. The grand doors opened, revealing a hall that still bore scorch marks along the pillars. The once lavish tapestries had been replaced by simpler hangings, each bearing the three-headed dragon. At the far end, Daenerys sat upon the Iron Throne, rebuilt or repaired, it seemed. The swords that formed it were darker, hammered anew. Around her stood Grey Worm, silently watchful, and to one side, Tyrion Lannister in a somber black doublet, his expression carefully guarded. Jon felt a surge of conflicting emotions at the sight of Daenerys. She was regal in a dark red gown trimmed with black fur, her silver-gold hair pulled back from her face in braids that accentuated her high cheekbones. Her eyes, once filled with warmth when she looked at him, were now unreadable. Yet there was a tension in her posture, a slight narrowing of her eyes that revealed she was no less conflicted than he. He approached with deliberate steps, Davos just behind him. At a respectful distance, Jon bowed his head, not quite kneeling. "Your Grace," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for receiving us." Daenerys inclined her head. "Lord Snow." That was all she said at first. The silence in the throne room was oppressive. Then, after a moment, her lips curved in a small, brittle smile. "Forgive me. Should I address you as Lord Snow? Or do you prefer another title now?" The question dripped with subtext, referencing the Targaryen identity he had refused. Jon managed to keep his face neutral. "Jon Snow is all I've ever been called." Daenerys' gaze flicked to Tyrion, then back to Jon. "Tyrion has informed me of your request to establish trade routes and supply lines to aid the North's recovery. After all the North sacrificed in the war against the dead, I understand your plight. I remember our alliance, our shared cause, but you must understand that I am Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. My rule must be recognized if this realm is to heal." Jon nodded slowly. "I understand. I came here to discuss terms that will help the North survive. The rest, we can talk about." Her eyes flickered with something like pain. "The rest? Yes, we have much to talk about." She rose from the throne and descended the few steps, stopping a yard or two from Jon. She studied him as if searching for something. "You denied what you are. You denied me. Why? The question hung in the air, personal and raw. Davos shifted uncomfortably behind Jon, and Tyrion's gaze slid away. Jon took a breath, feeling the same swirl of emotions that had tormented him for months. "Because I'm loyal to the North," he said quietly. "Because Ned Stark raised me as his son, and that will never change. Because the realm has had enough of men who believe their blood makes them kings." He forced himself to meet her gaze. "I once bent the knee to you because I believed in your vision, and because I believed that unity was our only hope against the Night King. But I won't claim a birthright that's only caused pain and suffering." Daenerys's lips parted, a silent moment passing between them. Then she drew a breath, schooling her features into a mask of composure. "So be it. I have the power to help the North or to let it starve. But I'm not my father, and I'm not the tyrant some call me. I will offer the North the food and supplies it needs for a fair price, to be determined by trade negotiations." She paused, her gaze a silent challenge. "However, in return, I need an oath of loyalty. The North remains part of the Seven Kingdoms under my rule. If you break faith with me again, the consequences will be dire." Jon swallowed hard. He had expected something like this, but hearing the words was another matter. He recalled the moment he'd pledged himself to her before, in front of her advisors, how it had felt like a betrayal of his father's memory, yet necessary to save lives. Would he do it again? The North had lost so much. He pictured the hungry faces, the burned fields, the hollowed-out halls that once housed proud families. He knew in that instant that he would do whatever he must to protect them. "We'll remain part of the realm," he said slowly, "so long as the crown does not demand more blood. If you rule justly, if you protect your people, then you'll have my loyalty as Lord of Winterfell." He felt a stab of guilt calling himself that, but Sansa had insisted he wear the name for the sake of the negotiations. Daenerys studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Tyrion will draw up the details with your approval. We'll set a fair tariff for grain and other supplies, in exchange for goods from the North, lumber, iron, and so forth. And I'll see to it the royal treasury offers a loan to help rebuild your defenses. In return, you'll swear fealty to the Iron Throne, as the Starks once did." Her voice hardened slightly, the Queen's authority surfacing. "But know this, Jon Snow. If you or any Stark rises against me, if I learn of betrayal, I will not be lenient a second time. The realm must have peace." Jon nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He recalled the day he had witnessed the destruction of King's Landing, the bells ringing. He recalled how she had looked astride her dragon, eyes filled with vengeance. Now she stood here offering terms that, while strict, were not entirely cruel. The people needed peace, and so he would do what he must. That day, they began negotiations. Tyrion and Davos spent hours at a long table, hashing out tariffs and trade routes, occasionally pausing to consult with Daenerys or Jon. Grey Worm remained present, silent and watchful, his face a mask of loyalty. Jon had the sense that this unsullied commander still harbored bitterness toward the North. Many of his brothers had died in the Great War, and perhaps he blamed some of the decisions made along the way. But he gave no outward sign of malice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the initial talks concluded, with an agreement to finalize the details over the coming days. Daenerys, seeming to sense Jon's exhaustion, dismissed them with a formal nod. Tyrion and Davos lingered, discussing certain details in low voices, while Jon turned to go, tension thrumming in his limbs. He felt a swirl of relief and trepidation. He had not bent the knee in the old sense. He had not declared unconditional fealty, but he had acknowledged her authority. Perhaps that was enough for her. For now. "Jon," Daenerys said softly, just as he was about to leave the throne room. He paused, turning. Her expression had softened in the waning torchlight. "Walk with me a moment." Unease coiled in his stomach, but he nodded. She gestured for Grey Worm to stay behind, then led Jon through a side door into a corridor that opened onto a balcony overlooking the city. The air was brisk but not as cold as Winterfell's. Night had fully fallen, and thousands of small fires and torches dotted the city below, revealing the pockets of life amid the ruins. Daenerys stood at the balcony's edge. Jon stepped up beside her, uncertain. She gazed down at King's Landing, her hands resting on the stone ledge. When I first came to Westeros, I dreamed of standing before adoring crowds, freeing them from tyrants. I believed I was doing the right thing. Her voice was subdued. Look at it now. Jon studied the city. Much of it was still broken. Efforts to rebuild were ongoing, but scars remained. War leaves scars, he said quietly. We did what we had to against the Night King, and you did what you felt you had to against Cersei. She turned her head, a faint quiver in her jaw. And you still refuse what you are, the rightful heir to this throne. The man I thought so many things. She paused, exhaling shakily. Sometimes I wonder if we could have ruled together, if we'd known the truth sooner, or if Rhaegar had not died as he did. Perhaps the realm would have been spared so much suffering. Jon clenched his fists at his sides. It's pointless to dwell on what might have been. We're here now, trying to pick up the pieces. Her gaze flicked over him. You're still as guarded as the day I first met you in Dragonstone, and I'm so tired of fighting. I want the realm to heal, and I don't want you as an enemy. She brushed a strand of her silver hair back. Is there any part of you that... She trailed off, her voice catching. Jon felt his heart pound. The memory of their brief love was tainted by so many things. The knowledge of their blood relation, the horrors of the war, the choices each had made. He looked at her, at the loneliness in her eyes. He felt that old ache stir in his chest. I cared for you, he said softly. A part of me always will, but we can't go back. He lowered his gaze. And the blood we share, you know it troubles me. I was raised in the north where incest is. He trailed off, unable to put the rest into words. She inhaled. I know. Perhaps in another life we could have loved freely. But destiny isn't so kind. If the realm is to have peace, we need to be allies. Can we do that? Jon hesitated only a moment. I'll do what's best for the realm. If that means being your ally, I'll be your ally. He offered a wan smile. But the north is my home, and that won't change. Daenerys nodded, a subtle sadness lingering on her face. Then she turned back to gaze at the city. Thank you, she whispered. For a while, they stood in silence, letting the distant sounds of rebuilding wash over them. In that quiet moment, Jon realized they were both shaped by tragedy, burdened by destinies neither had asked for. Yet they stood on the precipice of a new era, for good or ill. The next morning, negotiations resumed and continued for 3 more days. An agreement was finalized, with trade routes established: grain, produce, and coin in exchange for lumber, iron, and other northern resources. The North would pledge loyalty to the Iron Throne, governed by House Targaryen, as long as the crown upheld its obligations for mutual defense and aid. It was not the dream of northern independence that some had harbored, nor was it a forced subjugation. It was a compromise, a fragile peace balanced on the edge of trust. On the evening of the final day, Tyrion assembled the documents for signing. Jon affixed his seal as the representative of Winterfell, Lord Snow, while Daenerys signed as Daenerys of the House Targaryen, the first of her name, Queen of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Breaker of Chains, and so forth. The formality of it all felt surreal to Jon, but he went through it, mindful of the responsibility on his shoulders. Afterward, a small feast was held in the Red Keep's dining hall, modest by the standards of a capital that once held lavish banquets, but enough to mark the occasion. Jon and Davos ate in measured silence at one table, while Tyrion drank wine in tired relief, occasionally making pointed comments about still living to see tomorrow. Daenerys presided over the meal, quiet but composed, occasionally speaking to her advisors. Grey Worm was absent, presumably patrolling or otherwise occupied. Jon could feel eyes on him throughout the feast. Some who recognized him as a Targaryen pretender whispered behind their cups. Others seemed relieved that a peace was brokered at last. He paid them little mind, focusing on the roasted vegetables and the few cuts of meat they were served. Davos tried to lighten the mood with a few remarks about the onion trade, but it fell flat, overshadowed by the tension in the hall. Later, as the torches burned low, Jon slipped away from the hall, seeking solitude. He wandered through the corridors, eventually finding his way to a high rampart of the keep. The city sprawled below, its flickering lights slightly brighter than before. Hope, maybe, or just the normal business of a major population center. The air here was warmer than Winterfell's, but a breeze carried a hint of salt from Blackwater Bay. He leaned against the battlement, letting the night envelop him. He was no king, but he was not quite the same man who had come here. He had brokered peace, sacrificed the dream of an independent North for the sake of the people who lived there, but he had done so under an oath of loyalty to a Targaryen queen. Would that preserve the peace? Would the realm truly heal? Or had he merely delayed another conflict? A soft footstep behind him caused him to turn, hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. But he relaxed as he saw it was Tyrion. The dwarf approached, the night wind ruffling his hair. "I thought I might find you here, brooding in the dark. It's something you do well." Jon managed a faint smile. "You know me too well." Tyrion stopped beside him, resting his hands on the stone. "Well, we did it. Peace in writing at least. Let's hope it lasts longer than the wine in the cellars." They both stared out over the city, lost in thought. After a moment, Tyrion spoke again, more softly. "I know you have reservations. I share many of them. Daenerys is not the same idealistic queen I first followed. But maybe that's not entirely bad. She's seen the consequences of unchecked ambition. Maybe she'll rule more wisely because of it." He paused. "And you refused the crown or even the name. Perhaps that was wise too. Some men might have jumped at the chance to claim the Iron Throne. But not you." Jon shook his head. "I've had enough of thrones and crowns and prophecies. I just want to protect the people I care about. That's all I've ever wanted." Tyrion studied him in the low light, a wry twist to his mouth. "Well, you're a rarity then, someone who truly doesn't want power. Let's hope that helps keep you and the realm safe." He glanced away, the lines of his face etched with weariness. "We've earned a moment of rest, I think." Jon let out a long breath. "I hope so." He gazed down at the dark city below. "We've both seen too much fighting, Tyrion. If a piece of paper can keep swords sheathed for a while, that's worth more than I ever thought." They parted ways shortly after, each lost in his own thoughts. Jon returned to his chambers, a modest suite in one of the keep's renovated towers, where Davos was quietly packing their things. The old knight offered a tight smile. "We'll head north on the morrow, eh?" Jon nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing at the thought of returning home. "Yes, let's leave this place behind." And so they did. At dawn, Jon rode out of King's Landing alongside Davos and their northern escort, passing through the gates under the watchful gaze of the Unsullied. Tyrion stood by the roadside, giving them a final farewell, promising to send ravens once more details needed hashing out. Daenerys did not appear. Jon wondered if she stood on some balcony, watching from afar, or if she was too consumed by other matters. He wondered if he would ever see her again. The ride north was smoother than the journey south, in part because they carried signed letters from the Queen herself ordering safe passage. On the road, they witnessed more caravans heading northward, presumably bearing supplies that would help the battered land. Jon nodded to them in gratitude when they passed. Some recognized him and waved, while others looked on cautiously. At Moat Cailin, the gateway to the north, they found a small garrison of Stark soldiers who greeted them warmly. Word of the peace had reached them via Raven, and they seemed relieved that no southern army was marching behind them. Jon rested there a night, then pushed onward toward Winterfell, anxious to see Sansa, Arya, and the familiar gray walls again. When at last the banners of House Stark came into view, Jon felt a warmth fill his chest that no southern sun could match. He and Davos rode under the raised portcullis and into the courtyard. Sansa was there, tall and commanding in a thick cloak, her hair braided with a hint of silver netting, while Arya lurked behind her, arms crossed with a faint smirk. They both stepped forward to greet Jon, relief shining in their eyes. Sansa's smile was genuine, if tinged with concern. "You're back. Thank the gods." She glanced at Davos and the others, nodding in acknowledgement. "Did it go well?" Jon dismounted. The sense of Winterfell with smoke, cold air, the faint tang of the forge, enveloped him, and he felt something in him unwind. "We have a treaty," he said. "Trade for food and supplies, guaranteed by the crown, in exchange for loyalty. It's not everything we might have dreamed of, but it'll keep our people fed. There won't be war, at least not now." Arya's eyes flicked between them. "You swore loyalty to her?" Jon turned, meeting her cool stare. "I swore that the North would remain part of the Seven Kingdoms so long as she holds the throne. We need unity right now, more than ever." She said nothing for a moment, then exhaled and nodded, as if reluctantly accepting it. Sansa pressed her lips together. "Then that will have to be enough for now," she said quietly. "I'm just glad you're safe." That evening, a small gathering took place in the Great Hall, a modest celebration of Jon's return and the new peace. The mood was tentative, as though the North was uncertain how to feel about bending once more to a southern ruler. But the promise of supplies and gold to rebuild spoke volumes. Jon offered a few words, commending their resilience, reminding them that they had endured the long night and lived to see spring. The hall filled with cautious applause. As the days turned to weeks, grain began arriving from the south, along with builders and stonecutters who had heard there was work to be had in the battered northern keeps. Trade caravans traveled under safe passage, escorted by combined patrols of northern men and a handful of crown soldiers. The land still bore scars of war, but slowly, ever so slowly, life returned to the fields. Jon found himself consumed by the day-to-day tasks of governance in Winterfell. He listened to farmers, to merchants, to local lords who bickered over territory lines. He oversaw the distribution of supplies. He ensured that the roads remained safe from bandits. Each time he walked the walls, he felt the presence of his ancestors, as if the ghostly eyes of Bran the Builder and the old kings in the north watched him. He was no king, but he led them as best he could. Sometimes, when night fell and he allowed himself a moment of solitude, Jon would think of Daenerys, alone on the Iron Throne. He imagined her working tirelessly to rebuild a city she once tore apart with dragonfire, trying to balance her dream of liberation with the harsh realities of ruling a war-torn realm. He wondered if she was lonely, if she regretted the path she had taken, if she still thought of him. In those quiet hours, he acknowledged that a part of him would always care for her. But he was a Stark in his heart, and his life was in the north. One day, weeks after his return, he received a raven from Tyrion. It bore news that Daenerys had begun drafting a new charter for the realm, one that might reform aspects of feudal rule, including a more structured system of justice and oversight. It hinted at a more inclusive council, possibly even some form of parley with the Iron Islands and Dorne to stabilize the borders. Tyrion asked if the North would send representatives to future summits. Jon read the letter twice, feeling a surge of cautious optimism. Perhaps she truly was trying to break the wheel, or at least mend the spokes that were bent beyond recognition. He met with Sansa and Arya in the library tower to discuss it. Sansa, seated at a wooden desk, scanned the letter. "If she truly invites us to shape these reforms, we can help protect the North's interests and ensure we're not trampled by Southern laws." Arya, perched on a windowsill, shrugged. "It might be a trap or it might be genuine. Either way, we should be ready." Jon nodded. "I'll send Maester Wolkan as a representative for now, along with a few trusted advisors. I'll not leave the North again so soon. We have enough to tend to here." Sansa agreed, and plans were made. Over the following months, ravens flew back and forth. Maester Wolkan traveled to the capital, returning with tidings of slow but steady progress on new laws. Taxes were being restructured, local councils in each region were proposed, and the Queen was considering ways to check the power of the Iron Throne so that it might not be so absolute. Jon felt a stir of relief to see some of these changes in writing. Perhaps the realm was truly turning a new page. Perhaps the horrors of the past could guide them to a better future. Yet he remained watchful. Peace in Westeros was often fragile. He knew there were lords who might resent Daenerys's rule, others who might still see him as a rightful king. He knew that any slip could cause old wounds to fester into new wars. In the north, some whispered that they had traded one foreign ruler for another. Others, grateful for the supplies, insisted this was the best path. Jon did his best to mediate these differing views, to remind them all that after the Night King, after all the bloodshed, unity was their best shield against chaos. Seasons changed slowly in the north. Over time, the snows receded, giving way to a short, brisk summer. Fields sprouted grain, and livestock multiplied. The walls of Winterfell were fully repaired, its moat dredged and its gates fortified anew. Children played in the courtyard, apprentices hammered away in the forges, and from time to time, travelers from the south arrived, bringing news of King's Landing's ongoing reconstruction. Sansa continued to grow in her leadership, earning the respect of both noble and common folk. Arya came and went, sometimes taking trips to distant corners of the north, sometimes disappearing for weeks at a time. She never said where she went, but Jon suspected she was keeping a sharp eye on threats, ensuring no hidden enemy rose against them. He trusted her instincts and was grateful for her silent vigilance. Jon often found himself in the God's Wood at twilight, standing by the heart tree as its red leaves gently rustled. He would pray to the old gods, seeking guidance. He would think of Ned, and sometimes, in the hush of dusk, he would feel an almost tangible sense of comfort. In those moments, he knew he had made the right choice by remaining a Stark. He had refused a crown drenched in blood. He had chosen the path of service and duty, in the simplest, most human sense. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ancient weirwood's face, Jon felt a faint presence behind him. He turned to see Bran, bound to the back of a simple wooden sledge, his pale eyes distant, half hidden under the cowl of his warm cloak. Jon's heart tightened. Ever since the war against the dead, Bran had become more reclusive, more an enigma. He had traveled for a time, seeking out places of power in the north, or so the rumors said. He rarely spoke to them about what he saw. But here he was. "Bran," Jon said softly, "I didn't hear you come." Bran's voice was as distant as his gaze. "I asked them to bring me here. I wanted to see you." Jon exhaled. "It's good to see you. Are you well?" Bran tilted his head, as though listening to some distant sound. "As well as I can be. The North remembers, Jon. The old gods remember." Jon felt a ripple of something. Fate, destiny, or just the haunting memories of the White Walkers. "What do you mean?" Bran's eyes focused on Jon for a moment, startling in their intensity. "You've chosen your path. The God's Wood is quiet, but it speaks in its own way. The realm is at peace, for now." Jon nodded, unsure what else to say. The sense that Bran saw more than he could fathom remained. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rustling leaves. Then Bran spoke again, softly. "Father protected you because he loved you. You honor him by living free, not as a pawn to some prophecy or legacy. That's what he would have wanted." Jon swallowed hard. There were no tears left for him to shed over Ned Stark. He only felt gratitude and a lingering sadness for all that had been lost. "I won't forget," he murmured. Bran's gaze drifted toward the heart tree, and for a moment, Jon thought he saw a fleeting softness in his half-brother's eyes. Then Bran's expression went distant again, and he gave a slight nod. The men who had brought him helped wheel him away, leaving Jon alone under the red leaves. The twilight deepened, and Jon found himself staring into the carved face of the weirwood, feeling the gentle hush of the old gods settling around him like a cloak. In the days and months that followed, nothing momentous happened. No grand battles, no shocking betrayals. At times, Jon found it almost unnerving how quiet it was. He heard occasional updates from King's Landing. Daenerys introduced new measures to rebuild the farmland around the capital, extended an olive branch to Dorne, and began forging alliances through careful diplomacy. Word came that she had reached a formal accord with the Iron Islands, who sought more autonomy. She granted it in exchange for loyalty. Tyrion sent messages now and then, describing the tedious sessions of the council, the squabbles of lesser lords, and the slow, uncertain progress toward a more stable realm. For the first time in his life, Jon allowed himself to breathe. He spent time inspecting the watchtowers in the north, ensuring the strongholds along the wall were manned in case any threat emerged from beyond. The wildlings, free in the gift, began to settle, forming small communities that traded with the north. Tormund Giantsbane occasionally visited Winterfell, regaling Jon with tales of the free folks' hunts and celebrations. Ghost roamed at Jon's side, a silent, loyal presence. One crisp morning, as the leaves turned fiery red and orange across the north, Jon stood on Winterfell's walls and gazed outward at a realm that, against all odds, seemed poised to heal. He thought of the vow he had made, to remain the bastard of Winterfell, to deny his Targaryen heritage. Here, in this quiet dawn, he realized how much had hinged on that choice. If he had claimed the throne, or if he had refused any alliance with Daenerys, the land might have plunged into more bloodshed. But he had forged a path that gave the North what it needed: respite, stability, a chance for the families and farms to recover. Was he entirely at peace? Not always. The weight of his decisions still pressed on him, and he bore a lingering sadness for the illusions of love and belonging he had once held. But as he looked over the battlements, watching the morning light wash over the landscape, he felt a sense of quiet resolve. Sometimes the bravest thing one can do is to be true to oneself, even when the world demands otherwise. A raven flew overhead, circling before landing on a nearby tower. Jon watched it, thinking of the messages it might carry, the alliances and treaties and endless details of governance. Behind him, the great hall awaited with new disputes to settle, new tasks to handle. And he would face them as Jon Snow, bastard by birth, a Stark by choice, a man who had turned away from a crown for the sake of the realm he loved. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the northern wind whip around him, cold and fierce. Then he turned from the battlements and walked back into Winterfell, a faint glimmer of hope in his heart that this fragile peace might hold, and that his people would have the future they deserved. Jon woke before dawn and dressed in the chill darkness of his chamber, pulling on his thick woolen tunic and breeches. The late autumn wind whistled beyond the thick walls of Winterfell, carrying with it the sharp promise of a harsher cold to come. By the time he pulled on his boots, Ghost was already at the door, a silent white presence, ears pricked in anticipation of an early walk through the courtyard. Jon felt a rush of affection for the direwolf, his oldest companion. In many ways, Ghost was a living reminder of who Jon truly was: a Stark, a son of Ned Stark by choice if not by blood. Despite the Targaryen lineage that had come to light, Jon had set that aside. He had made his vow, forging a pact with Daenerys Targaryen that left her on the Iron Throne and the North under Stark governance in all but official name. Still, from time to time, the old ghosts rose within him. He would recall the swirl of silver hair, the heat of a dragon's breath, the knowledge that he had once ridden regal across storm-torn skies. He remembered Daenerys's gaze, intent and sorrowful, as they signed the documents binding the North to the throne. Their fates had twisted around each other like two rivers briefly converging, then parting in different directions. She remained in King's Landing, laboring to rebuild what she had destroyed. He remained in Winterfell, nurturing life in a land battered by the long night. As he stepped into the corridor, Ghost padding beside him, he caught the smell of fresh bread wafting up from the kitchens. The warmth of the ovens, the laughter of a few servants already at work, these homely details comforted him. He moved quietly past the sleeping quarters of the keep, heading outside. When he arrived in the courtyard, he found a pair of guards near the gates, stamping their feet in the cold. They saluted him with gloved hands, their breath steaming. Jon returned the gesture, giving them a small nod before heading to the Godswood. The Godswood always felt like a sanctuary. The red leaves of the weirwood had shifted to a deeper hue as winter approached. Even in the half-light before dawn, they glimmered faintly. Ghost trotted a little ahead, sniffing around for any recent scents. Jon paused before the heart tree. The face carved into its pale bark stared out with wide eyes that seemed to know all his secrets, all his doubts. He bowed his head, exhaling, and let the hush fill him. In that moment, a memory of Bran's words drifted through his mind. Father protected you because he loved you. You honor him by living free. Jon let those words settle into him. Whatever hardships might loom on the horizon, he would face them as the man he had chosen to be, not the one a prophecy or a rumor might dictate. He placed a hand on the tree's knotted trunk, feeling the faint texture under his fingers, then turned away to go about his duties. Ghost followed, watchful. He headed toward the ramparts, climbing the winding stairs to the top of Winterfell's walls. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, an icy pink along the horizon. He gazed out over the expanse of the north. In the distance, he could see farmland that had only recently been replanted. Barns, storehouses, and cottages dotted the snow-dusted fields. The roads were improving, thanks to a steady trickle of resources from the south. When he came down, the keep was stirring. Kitchen staff carted trays of hot bread and porridge. Stable hands led horses out to be fed and brushed, and a handful of guards changed shifts. Jon returned Ghost to the courtyard, where the dire wolf seemed content to laze near the stables in a patch of weak sunlight. Then Jon made his way inside, to the great hall, which smelled faintly of the lingering embers from last night's fires. Sansa was already seated at one of the trestle tables, breakfasting on bread, cheese, and a cup of spiced cider. She wore a modest gray dress trimmed in white fur, her red hair braided around her head in a simple yet regal style. At her side, Arya nursed a mug of hot tea, her face half-shadowed by the early morning light. Jon sat down across from them, and a serving girl immediately brought him a bowl of porridge. Sansa waited for the girl to move on before speaking. "There's news," she said quietly. "A raven arrived late last night from King's Landing." Jon took a sip of water. "What does it say?" Arya reached inside her cloak, produced a folded parchment, and handed it to Jon. "Maester Wolkin was too tired to wake you, so he brought it to us," she said. "He's been up half the night writing replies to other letters." Jon unfolded the parchment, scanning it quickly. He recognized Tyrion's hand, neat and precise. The words carried tidings of a new challenge. Some lords in the Westerlands, those once fiercely loyal to Cersei, were protesting their increased taxes under Daenerys's new policies. They claimed that reconstruction funds were being channeled to King's Landing at the expense of smaller towns. There were rumors, too, of a few ex-Lannister knights gathering in secret, possibly conspiring to undermine the Queen's authority. Tyrion didn't sound alarmed, but he did ask for the North's continued support of the Crown's laws. Jon frowned. "It seems the peace is more fragile than we thought. Tyrion's worried about unrest in the Westerlands. He's asking us to confirm that we stand by the Crown's new tax codes." Arya made a soft sound of disdain. "Always taxes, always fighting over coin. If men put half as much energy into actual rebuilding as they do into haggling for gold, we'd be better off." Sansa spoke more carefully. "These lords lost prestige and property during the war. Some had entire holdings burned by Daenerys's dragons when she fought Cersei's forces. Now, with her on the throne, they're forced to pay taxes to support the capital's reconstruction. I can see why they might feel resentful. That doesn't make rebellion right, but we need to tread carefully." Jon nodded. "We'll need to decide on our position. Do we openly condemn them, or do we suggest mediation?" He tapped the parchment. "Tyrion is pressing for us to voice strong support for Daenerys's reforms. If we do that, we risk alienating some of these lords who might be open to trade with us. If we don't, we might be undermining the peace we worked so hard to secure." Arya arched a brow. "Let them be alienated, if they wish to undermine everything. A house divided can't stand." Sansa sipped her cider. "True, but the North is still rebuilding. If there's an upheaval in the Westerlands, it could disrupt commerce routes. No one wants to send caravans through a land plagued by bandits and rebellious knights. This realm can't afford another war, especially not one over tax burdens. Jon sighed, pushing aside his half-eaten porridge. I'll write Tyrion today. We'll state that the North supports the Crown's lawful policies, but also encourage the Crown to consider a delegation to the Westerlands to address grievances. If Daenerys can show them she's willing to hear complaints and mitigate where possible, maybe they'll feel less cornered. He drummed his fingers on the table. I'll also suggest that she handle these lords with care. Fear alone won't hold a realm together forever. Sansa nodded, relief flickering in her gaze. That sounds reasonable. A carefully balanced stance. Arya shrugged. It's your call, but be mindful. The last time we asked Daenerys to show mercy, she caught herself, and an uncomfortable silence stretched. They all remembered the ashes of King's Landing, the shock of that day when the bells rang and the city burned. Arya finally shook her head. Just be mindful. Jon let out a long breath. I will. They finished their breakfast in thoughtful quiet, the only sounds being the scrape of cutlery and the low murmur of the hall's other occupants. When they rose to go about their daily duties, Sansa took Jon's arm, guiding him aside for a moment. I know how heavy this burden is, she said softly, looking up at him with earnest eyes. Balancing the North's interests with loyalty to the Crown is no simple feat, but you've kept us safe. If you need anything, just let me know. He placed his hand over hers. I appreciate that, he said, voice gentle. Thank you, Sansa. He slipped away, heading to the small council chamber where he often conferred with his advisors. A few northern lords, Davos Seaworth and Maester Wolkan among them. The chamber was simple. A long oaken table, a few tapestries depicting stark wolves running through snowy forests, and one tall, narrow window that let in the weak northern light. Davos was already there, leaning on the table as he pored over a map of the roads around Moat Cailin. There you are, lad, Davos said, looking up. Have you heard about the matter of these Westerlands lords? Jon nodded. Just from the Raven. We'll be drafting a response soon. Davos ran a hand through his graying hair. We've got our own complications, you know. Some of our men have reported outlaws along the eastern roads, not far from White Harbor. They've been harrying smaller merchant caravans, nabbing supplies meant for the people there. Jon frowned. Bandits or something else? Likely bandits, Davos said with a shrug. Ragged men desperate for food or coin, but we can't let them keep raiding. It only fuels more unrest. I'd suggest sending a few patrols from White Harbor's garrison. Jon agreed. We can't allow lawlessness to fester. Let's ensure we coordinate with Lord Manderley. He'll have men to spare, hopefully. If not, we'll dispatch some from Winterfell. They spoke for a while, reviewing trade routes, supply shipments, the state of granaries. By the time they finished, the sun was fully up, casting angled beams through the window. Jon turned next to the matter of Tyrion's letter, dictating a measured response to Maester Wolkan. He emphasized the North's commitment to the Crown's authority and recommended a diplomatic approach to the unrest. Satisfied, he sent the Raven off, feeling a subtle tightness in his chest. Each day, he waded deeper into the murk of political negotiations, work he had once despised, back when he was a steward at the Night's Watch. But perhaps all those lessons in balancing truths and loyalties had prepared him for this. Time passed, and the first snows of the new winter began to dust Winterfell's roofs. With them came more ravens from the south. Tyrion wrote that Daenerys had sent envoys to the Westerlands to meet these disgruntled lords and hear their grievances. Violence had not yet erupted, but tensions were high. Jon read these letters with a furrowed brow, hoping the peaceful approach would hold. He prayed Daenerys had learned from her past extremes, that she would govern with something closer to the justice she had once promised. Around the same time, word arrived from the Vale. Lady Robin Arryn, now grown, but still sickly and prone to erratic whims, had died unexpectedly, leaving the Vale under the regency of a distant Royce cousin. Some wondered if foul play was involved. Others believed the young lord had simply succumbed to his frailties. Either way, the Vale's leadership was in flux. Sansa, who had connections there from her time as a hostage and then a wary guest, expressed concern. She doubted the new regent's competence, worrying it might destabilize the Vale's readiness to continue their trade and defensive pacts with the North. Over dinner one night, Sansa discussed the matter with Jon, Arya, and Davos in the Solar. "The Vale supplies us with ore and produce from their mountain meadows," Sansa said, "and we supply them with certain northern goods, like furs and cured meats. If their leadership falters, the trade might be disrupted. We should consider sending an emissary to ensure the lines of communication remain open." Jon agreed. "We can't afford to let them drift away from us. We've counted on the Knights of the Vale more than once. If we lose their friendship, we become more reliant on Daenerys, which in turn leaves the North less independent in practice." Arya leaned back in her seat, swirling a cup of warm spiced wine. "Then let's send someone we trust. Maybe Brienne of Tarth, if we can spare her? She once had some dealings with the Vale, didn't she?" Sansa pressed her lips together. "Brienne is loyal to me, but she's also taken on more responsibilities in Winterfell. She's training new recruits for our guard, at my request. We could send someone else, but it needs to be someone the Vale respects." Jon considered. "What about Samwell Tarly? He has a way with diplomacy, and he's well regarded as a scholar now. He's also neutral enough that the Vale Lords might not see him as a direct threat." Davos nodded, stroking his beard. "That might be a sound idea. He's in Old Town now, finishing some business for the Citadel, but he's been traveling back and forth. If we send a raven inviting him to act as our envoy, he might agree." Sansa glanced at Arya, then Jon. "Do it. The sooner, the better." So it was settled. The following morning, a raven was dispatched to Old Town with a letter addressed to Samwell Tarly, requesting his assistance as an emissary to the Vale on behalf of House Stark. Meanwhile, Jon and Sansa prepared a series of letters to the Vale's new regent, extending Winterfell's condolences on Robin Arryn's death and politely requesting continued friendship. Arya, who loathed formalities, rolled her eyes but aided them by offering a few discreet suggestions on how best to phrase the letters so as not to offend proud Vale Lords. A few days later, when the sun broke through a particularly gray stretch of sky, a new visitor arrived at Winterfell's gates. A young man riding a sturdy horse, wearing battered armor beneath a black cloak. The guards hailed him cautiously, but he announced himself as Ser Waymar Royce, a cousin to the main Royce branch in the Vale. Sansa, alerted to this arrival, came to the courtyard with Jon. Ser Waymar dismounted, wincing as if stiff from the cold. He bowed stiffly. "My lords, my lady," he said, addressing Jon and Sansa. "I come with greetings from the Vale and a request." Sansa tilted her head politely. "Welcome to Winterfell, Ser Waymar. Your presence is unexpected. I hope all is well." The knight's expression tightened. "It's about Lord Robin's passing. Some in the Vale whisper that it wasn't natural. His health was poor, yes, but there's a suspicion that he might have been helped along to the grave. And there's friction about the new regent, my cousin Norbert Royce. Some houses support him, others don't. Factions have begun to form." He swallowed. "I fear the Vale might tear itself apart if an impartial eye doesn't step in." Jon and Sansa exchanged glances. Sansa's brow knit. "That's dire news. We were planning to send an emissary to help ensure stability. Samwell Tarly, you may have heard of him. He has connections with the Citadel and some experience with southern politics." Ser Waymar nodded. "We welcome any help, but there are those who might not heed a maester or scholar. Many prefer steel over parchment. I came because I hoped House Stark might offer more direct guidance." Jon's shoulders tensed slightly. "You're suggesting we send soldiers? Or that we personally intervene in Vale politics?" The knight hesitated. "Not necessarily soldiers, but the Vale remembers how Sansa Stark once brought the Knights of the Vale to retake Winterfell. There's respect for her. If Lady Sansa were to come, or if another high-ranking Stark were to visit and speak with the lords in person, it might help quell suspicion. Show that the North values the Vale's unity." Sansa's expression grew guarded. "I appreciate the respect, but traveling to the Vale could be fraught. We have our own responsibilities here, and the roads can be dangerous as winter creeps closer." Jon nodded in agreement. We're also dealing with banditry near White Harbor and tension in the Westerlands. I can't simply abandon Winterfell. Ser Waymar bowed his head again. I understand, but the longer we delay, the more likely the Vale will fracture. I ask only that you consider it. Your presence might carry more weight than any letter. Jon exchanged another look with Sansa. She set her jaw, turning back to the night. We'll discuss it privately and let you know by tomorrow. For now, you're our guest. Rest from your journey. We'll see to it you're given lodging and a hot meal. He thanked them, and a steward led him away. As soon as he was gone, Sansa let out a breath, crossing her arms. This complicates things. The Vale is an important ally, but traveling there could draw us into a political mess. It might take weeks or months to untangle. Meanwhile, we have our own duties at home. Arya, who had watched the exchange from a distance, approached with that lithe silence that so often characterized her. I can go. No one there would expect me to be the Stark envoy, especially if I travel lightly. I can see firsthand what's going on. Slip into the shadows if needed. Rumors of murder, that's more my domain than writing letters. Sansa looked at her younger sister, frowning. But we need someone who can speak with authority on behalf of House Stark, not just skulk around corners. Arya shrugged. I can do both. You and Jon can send me with official documents granting me your voice. The Vale might scoff at the idea of a woman in leathers representing Winterfell, but I'll make them listen. And if they don't, well, I have other ways. Jon considered. It's a risk. Are you certain you want to do this? It's not just sneaking around. It's politics, negotiation, all those things you despise. A faint smile curved Arya's lips. I don't despise them quite as much as before. Besides, I won't be alone. You can send me with a small retinue of loyal men. If trouble stirs, I'll handle it. She glanced at Sansa. And if I can't, I'll send word. You can come rescue me, big sister. Sansa pressed her lips together, thoughtful. It's unconventional, but Arya has proven she's capable of handling herself in dangerous situations. If she goes as our official representative, it might minimize the risk that the Vale Lords see this as some sort of occupation force. Meanwhile, we remain here to keep Winterfell stable and maintain our communication with the Crown. Jon nodded. All right, then we'll need to prepare letters of introduction. Let Ser Waymar know that Arya will travel with him. We'll also want to time it so that Samwell Tarly's envoy arrives around the same time, if possible. A two-pronged approach. Sam working the scholarly angle, Arya representing House Stark more directly. Arya's grin widened. It'll be an adventure, and it's been too quiet around here, anyway. Jon shot her a mildly reproachful look. Let's hope it remains quiet in the sense of no bloodshed. The plan was set in motion. Over the next day, Sansa drafted official letters, affixing the Stark seal with her own hand, naming Arya Stark as Winterfell's envoy to the Vale. Jon oversaw the selection of half a dozen loyal guards, a mix of Winterfell men and a few knights from the Vale who had stayed on in the north. They gathered supplies for the journey, ensuring Arya would have all she needed for the ride south. Ser Waymar was relieved to learn that House Stark would indeed send someone of import, even if it wasn't the Lady of Winterfell herself. Before dawn on the following day, the small group set out from Winterfell's gates. Arya rode at the head, her fur-lined cloak fluttering in the cold wind. Ser Waymar rode beside her, pointing out the best routes through the mountain passes. Jon watched from the ramparts, arms folded against the chill. He felt a twinge of worry for Arya. He always did, no matter her formidable skills. She waved once, a confident salute, and then they were gone. In the days that followed, Winterfell continued its routine. Jon divided his time between overseeing the harvests, such as they were in the nearly frozen fields, and addressing the petty disputes that arose among local lords. Davos assisted with logistics, ensuring the roads remained guarded. Sansa managed the castle's internal affairs, from the staff's needs to arrangements for potential new alliances. Bran was occasionally seen in the Godswood, or in a tower window, gazing out at the world with an otherworldly calm. Jon sometimes wished he could glean from Bran's visions whether the realm was truly on the path to lasting peace. or if more storms lay ahead. A fortnight passed with no raven from Arya, which wasn't surprising given the slow pace of travel. But one morning, a message arrived from Samwell Tarly in Old Town. He agreed to the request, stating he would journey to the Vale within the month, as soon as his duties at the Citadel allowed him to gather the necessary research materials. He seemed eager to help, expressing hope that a careful approach might prevent bloodshed. Jon smiled, relieved to know Sam would be part of the effort. If anyone could bring a sense of reason to a tense political situation, it was Sam. In the meantime, Tyrion's letters from King's Landing reported cautious progress in the Westerland's negotiations. Daenerys's envoys had managed to quell immediate rebellion by promising limited tax relief for smaller holdings, so long as they pledged loyalty. There were rumors, however, that some ex-Lannister loyalists were quietly leaving the region, perhaps heading abroad to Essos, possibly seeking alliances with mercenary companies. Tyrion warned that they might be planning a return once they secured more resources. Like seeds planted in darkness, he wrote, they may sprout in the least expected moment. Jon read these updates with a sense of weary inevitability. Even the best intentee. One queen could not erase years of bitterness in a single stroke. The realm had known too many wars, too many grudges. Yet he held to the hope that persistent diplomacy, combined with careful enforcement of the law, would avert a fresh disaster. Still, the tension weighed on him like a silent, coiled serpent at the edge of his mind. About 3 weeks after Arya's departure, a raven arrived from her in the Vale. Jon was in the courtyard, inspecting a wagon of barley that had just arrived from the south, when Maester Wolkan came hurrying out, holding the parchment as if it were delicate. Jon took it, heart beating a little faster at the sight of Arya's seal. Sansa joined him at once, and they unfurled it together. Arya's handwriting was quick, terse. I've arrived in the Vale safely. The mountain passes were cold but no trouble. Ser Waymar is loyal. Lady Marjorie Belmore and Lord Nestor Royce welcomed me, though tension is thick. Many blame Robin's regent, Norbert Royce, for letting the young lord die. Others whisper that someone from House Belmore or House Linderley had a hand in it. No open violence yet, but I sense a coil about to snap. Meeting with Sam soon, he's on his way. We'll try to keep peace. Miss you, but don't worry. I can handle myself. Arya. Sansa exhaled, relief and concern mingling in her gaze. At least she arrived safely, though it sounds as if the Vale is on the brink. Jon nodded, folding the parchment. Yes, let's hope Sam gets there soon. Arya's good at handling swords and secrets, but Sam can be the voice of reason. If the Vale Lords are on the edge of war, we need them to step back from it. He handed the parchment to Maester Wolkan. Send a reply that we acknowledge her message, and that we're ready to offer any assistance needed. Wolkan bowed. At once, my lord. As the Maester left, Jon turned to Sansa. We should also inform Tyrion of the situation. He might have some advice. He used to be married to you, and the Lannisters had dealings with the Vale. He might know which lords are the greatest threat to stability. Sansa lowered her eyes momentarily, remembering that brief, unhappy marriage. Yes, he likely does. I'll write to him today. She looked out across the courtyard, her expression distant. I just hope Arya doesn't find herself in the middle of a pitched battle. The Vale's lords have a reputation for swift, decisive action when provoked. Jon tried to sound reassuring. Arya's survived far worse. She'll find a way through. Yet a knot of worry coiled in his stomach. He could face any number of enemies with a sword in hand, but the knowledge that Arya was many leagues away, possibly in the midst of political treachery, left him feeling powerless. He busied himself with Winterfell's affairs. More shipments arrived from the south, and Jon made sure the supplies were distributed fairly among the lesser lords who had pledged fealty. Once or twice, he personally rode out to small hamlets to see how the people fared in the dwindling daylight of autumn. The nights grew longer, the days colder. Snow flurries became more frequent. Winter was not at its fiercest yet, but Jon sensed it waiting, gathering strength. Meanwhile, Sansa continued to receive letters from Tyrion, each one detailing the slow, complicated steps Daenerys took to unify the realm. A new council, formed of representatives from each region, was in the works. Tyrion hinted that, eventually, they might want a Stark to come to King's Landing to officially occupy a seat, much like the old Targaryen-era councils, ensuring all major houses were heard. Jon read that part with apprehension. He was not eager to return to the south, especially not to serve in a role that would bind him more tightly to Daenerys' throne. Nevertheless, the idea had merit. If the North had a voice in the capital, it might prevent future misunderstandings. Soon after, word reached Winterfell that Sam had arrived safely in the Vale. Arya's second letter followed, more detailed. Jon read it by the warmth of the fire in Sansa's solar one evening. Sam's here. He's already meeting with Norbert Royce and the senior lords. They're open to hearing him out, if only because of his Citadel ties. He's brought a chest of histories and genealogies, hoping to trace each house's claims and see if that resolves any disputes. There's talk of arranging a new leader for the Vale, perhaps from another branch of House Aaron's bloodline, or a cousin who can unite factions. But that's the rub, everyone has a different candidate in mind. I suspect murder, but have no proof yet. The knights remain calm for now, but I've seen quick tempers in the Great Hall. Sam says we must proceed carefully. I'm doing my best, though I miss having you both here to talk things through. We'll send more news soon. Arya. Sansa looked thoughtful. A new leader for the Vale. We knew that was a possibility. Robin had no heirs. But if multiple houses claimed the right to choose, it could get messy fast. Jon leaned back in the chair, feeling the fire's heat on his back. We might have to weigh in. The Vale is too important to let them self-destruct. If their knights turn on each other, the entire region could descend into chaos. Davos, who had joined them, nodded gravely. Perhaps you should write to Arya and Sam, urging them to propose a council of Vale houses with an impartial arbiter, someone they all trust. If they can't decide on a single leader, maybe they can form a regency council until a rightful successor is agreed upon. Sansa ran her finger along the letter's edge. That could work, but they need a strong voice to hold them together. Arya might not have the patience for that sort of prolonged negotiation, and Sam, though brilliant, isn't exactly forceful in a room of bickering lords. Jon rubbed his brow. We might have to send someone else as well, or at least threaten that the crown will intervene if they can't settle it peacefully. The Vale lords may not fear House Stark enough to unify, but they might fear Daenerys' dragons descending on them. Sansa's gaze hardened slightly. I don't like the idea of threatening them with dragonfire. We've seen how that goes. Jon sighed. I know, but sometimes the mere specter of a queen's wrath is enough to force men to the table. He paused. If we do that, though, we risk driving them away, turning them into open rebels. Perhaps a gentler reminder that the crown expects stability is better. They decided to write to Arya and Sam, advising them to consider a regency council or some form of power sharing. They also agreed to mention, in polite terms, that the crown was watching developments and hoped for a peaceful outcome. No mention of dragons, only the implication that ignoring the realm's broader peace would be unwise. With that plan settled, they ended the evening, though Jon lay awake in his chamber long after, listening to the winter wind outside. Each of these crises might be small, but enough small crises could pile up into a new war. And war, once started, was hard to stop. A week later, a third letter arrived from Arya, shorter, more urgent. Tensions have escalated. Lord Nestor Royce publicly accused Lord Linderley of poisoning Robin Arryn. Linderley's men responded by demanding a trial by combat. Sam has tried to propose a calm inquiry, but the knights are restless. If it comes to a trial, we need a champion. I'm willing, but that may stoke the fires further, an outsider intervening. I'm trying to keep the peace, but the Vale lords might look to me to decide how to handle the challenge. Advice needed. Sansa clenched her jaw, passing the letter to Jon. He read it, feeling his stomach twist. Trial by combat was the old way of settling disputes when accusations flew. But if the Vale was so on edge that they defaulted to violence, it meant negotiations were on the verge of collapse. They convened an immediate council in the Great Hall. The northern lords who were present expressed concern. Some urged letting the Vale handle its own affairs. Others pointed out that a war in the Vale would inevitably spill over into the North's trade routes. Davos, leaning forward with a sigh, voiced the prevailing worry. We can't let them tear themselves apart, but we can't be seen as tyrants imposing our will. Jon turned to Sansa, who sat in Ned Stark's old seat at the high table. We could send a small delegation to reinforce Arya's authority. Show the Vale we take this matter seriously without sending a full army. Sansa nodded. Yes, perhaps a handful of trusted knights, with a letter from me stating that Arya speaks with the full power of House Stark. We can also encourage Sam to push for a formal hearing of the accusations, not just a duel. If a trial by combat is absolutely demanded, then we can appoint a neutral champion, someone respected in the Vale. Not Arya, unless there's no other choice. A new voice spoke from the crowd. It was Brienne of Tarth, who stood near the back, a tall figure in shining plate. I'll go, she offered, stepping forward. I've sworn to protect the Stark family, and I have some renown for honorable combat. If a trial by combat cannot be avoided, I might serve as a champion. I'm not from the Vale, but I'm not from the North either. I'm an outsider they might trust to be impartial. Sansa considered the offer with visible relief. Ser Brienne, that might be exactly what we need. But are you sure you're prepared for the dangers? Brienne's blue eyes gleamed with quiet determination. I am. I won't allow House Stark's allies to fall into bloodshed if there's a better way. Jon nodded. Then prepare yourself. You'll take a small escort and ride for the Vale at first light. Time is short. Let's hope you can help Sam and Arya keep things civil. That settled, the meeting ended. Sansa and Jon spent the rest of the evening drafting letters of introduction and authority for Brienne. They also wrote a private missive to Arya, telling her to hold on, that help was coming. Before dawn, Brienne departed with 10 skilled knights and squires, riding swiftly south. As Jon watched them vanish through Winterfell's gates, he prayed that they would arrive before violence erupted. He thought of Arya, her restless spirit, her lethal skill, and he wondered if she would be forced to fight again, in a trial by combat that could ignite an entire region. While they waited for further news, Winterfell kept its routine. The cold deepened, frost forming on windows in intricate patterns. Sometimes Jon found himself standing on the ramparts at night, remembering the creatures beyond the wall, the long night. He would breathe in the northern air and remind himself that, compared to that existential horror, political squabbles were mundane. Yet mundane squabbles often cost just as many lives. Ravens came from King's Landing, detailing the Crown's attempt to reform the city's guard. Tyrion was pushing for a new structure that limited corruption, something the old City Watch had in abundance. Daenerys had given him leave to reorganize it, but there were bribes, black market influences, and shady figures who profited from chaos. Jon read each dispatch with a sense of gratitude that Winterfell, at least, was simpler. Fewer people, fewer coins changing hands, fewer shadows in the alleys. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of tense waiting, a raven arrived bearing 2 separate letters, one from Arya, one from Sam. Sansa, Jon, and Davos gathered in the small solar again to read them. Jon opened Arya's first, scanning the words hungrily. We're holding things steady for now. Brienne arrived just in time. The threat of her stepping in as champion made some knights reconsider a quick duel. Lord Linderley claims innocence, offering to let Sam's investigation proceed. Sam's collecting testimonies, trying to find real evidence of foul play. Meanwhile, the Vale lords bicker about a successor to Robin Arryn. Some want a distant cousin with Arryn blood. Others want a Royce or a Belmore. I suspect a compromise is needed, possibly a marriage that unites 2 claims. Brienne's presence calms tempers, but the tension is thick enough to taste. I've used your letters, Sansa, to remind them that House Stark expects them to keep the peace. For now, they listen, but the slightest spark could still set them off. We'll keep you updated. Arya. Jon exhaled in relief. So Brienne arrived in time. Good. A trial by combat might still happen, but at least they're pausing. Sansa nodded, then picked up Sam's letter. My lord and lady, I send greetings from the Vale. We've made some progress. Lord Nestor Royce agreed to open an inquiry with witnesses, though many remain afraid to speak openly. We've discovered that young Lord Robin had been ill for weeks before his death, with multiple potions administered by Maester Colwyn. The question is whether any potions were laced with poison. I've asked to examine the Maester's records, but they're incomplete. Lord Linderley swears he never meddled. There's a rumor that a knight from House Corbray was seen slipping into the Ares kitchens the night before Robin died. But rumor is not proof. Arya is pressing them to remain patient while we gather facts. Ser Brienne's reputation also helps to deter quick violence. I believe we can resolve this if we find the truth, or if we can arrange a compromise for the Vale's leadership that satisfies enough factions. That may require a marriage or a shared regency. We'll send more news soon. Samwell Tarly. Sansa read it aloud, relief mingling with curiosity. So, it might be something as simple as a maester's error or something more sinister. At least Sam is investigating thoroughly. Jon sat back, brow furrowed. The Vale Lords are proud. A forced marriage alliance might not go over well unless it's seen as beneficial to both sides. We need a candidate who can unite them all. Robin's father was Jon Arryn, who had no other surviving heirs except very distant kin. Right? Sansa nodded. Yes, some lines trace back to the Ares old blood, but none are direct. The Royces, Belmores, Graftons, and Linderleys each claim some measure of relation, usually through marriages that occurred generations ago. It's a tangle. Davos stroked his beard. If Sam can't produce evidence of poison or innocence, the suspicion will linger, and that means tension remains. We might encourage a broader gathering of all Vale Lords under a single roof, letting Sam present his findings, and Arya and Brienne ensure order. Perhaps then they can vote or choose a new leader by consensus. Sansa pursed her lips. The Vale historically had less democracy and more feudal hierarchy, but times change, and they might accept a solution that avoids war. Jon agreed. Let's write back, urging them to consider a formal assembly. If the Vale's leading houses gather, they can perhaps decide on a caretaker for the Eyrie until Robin's successor is chosen. Meanwhile, Sam can present what he's learned about the cause of death. If no clear culprit emerges, at least suspicion might fade if the evidence suggests a natural illness. They drafted replies along these lines, sealing them with the Stark sigil. Another raven took flight. Days stretched into a fortnight, and in that time the snows came heavier. Winter's jaws closed tighter on the north, limiting travel and hampering trade. Still, the roads remained passable for now. Jon prayed that the Vale, with its steep mountain passes, would remain accessible long enough for Sam, Arya, and Brienne to avert disaster. At last, a new raven flew in, tired and ragged from battling the weather. Jon and Sansa hurried to the rookery, where Maester Wolkan was coaxing the bird with water and seeds. The letter bore Arya's seal again, but also Sam's. Jon opened it, scanning quickly. His eyes widened, and he read it aloud to Sansa. We've called the assembly in the Ares High Hall. Almost all the major Vale Lords came. Sam presented his findings. Robin Arryn's sickness was genuine, caused by a chronic condition of the lungs, worsened by repeated potions with milk of the poppy. Maester Colwyn believed he was easing the pain, but there were side effects. There is circumstantial evidence that House Corbray's knight might have tampered with one of the potions, but it's not conclusive. The Corbrays deny it, claiming some old feud with the Royces is fueling false accusations. A fight nearly broke out on the High Hall's dais, but Brienne stepped in, disarmed two knights before they could draw steel on each other. As for the leadership question, so far, no single candidate has majority support. Lord Nestor Royce proposed a regency council of 3. Himself representing the Royces, Lady Marjorie Belmore representing her house, and Ser Edric Linderley for his. They'd rule the Vale jointly until a new heir to the Arryn line is found or appointed. Some object wanting a single lord. Sam suggests that if no heir emerges, they might adopt a suitable candidate from among the distant Arryn kin. The final decision is pending. We're close to an agreement, but it could still collapse if tempers flare again. We might need a more forceful push from House Stark or even from the Crown to finalize it. Arya and Sam. Jon lowered the letter, meeting Sansa's gaze. They're near a deal, but tensions remain. We could send an official statement supporting the Regency Council, urging them to accept it. Sansa nodded thoughtfully. Yes, that might tip the scales. Arya seems to think the three-person council is workable. If we endorse it, perhaps the dissenters will relent. Davos, who had joined them in the rookery, cleared his throat. And what if they still won't agree? Should we threaten to bring in the Crown's authority? Or do we risk making it worse if we mention Daenerys's name? Jon grimaced. It's a tricky balance. If we openly bring Daenerys into this, the Vale might see it as an attempt to strong-arm them. However, if we remain too passive, they could descend into infighting. A subtle reminder might suffice, something like "We urge peace," and the Crown expects stability among its vassals. Not an outright threat, but enough to make them think twice. Sansa concurred. Let's do that. Express full support for the Regency Council. Praise Sam's impartial inquiry. Emphasize that further bloodshed benefits no one, and that the Crown has a vested interest in seeing the Vale remain loyal. That should be enough. They composed the letter at once, setting their official seals. Jon felt some tension lift from his chest. At least the matter seemed on the verge of resolution. But in his heart, he knew how often almost done negotiations could suddenly crumble. He could only trust Arya's instincts and Sam's diplomacy, and Brienne's sword arm if it came to that. More days passed. The snows grew thicker around Winterfell, piling against the walls. Servants labored to keep pathways clear. Sansa oversaw the distribution of winter stores. Jon joined the guards on frequent patrols atop the ramparts, scanning for any sign of trouble. The realm felt quiet, yet that quiet carried the weight of unspent tension. Occasionally, they heard rumors from travelers. The Golden Company, or what remained of it, had scattered across Essos. Euron Greyjoy was dead in the last war, leaving the Iron Islands uncertain but mostly under Yara's leadership. Dorne stayed silent, minding its own affairs. Perhaps, for once, no southern storm threatened. Perhaps, at last, after what felt like an endless wait, a raven arrived bearing good news. Sansa and Jon read it together before the Great Hall's hearth, with Davos standing by. It was from Sam, countersigned by Arya. The Vale Lords have agreed to the Regency Council. Nestor Royce, M. Argery Belmore, and Edric Linderley will share governance. They've formally recognized that Lord Robin's passing was likely natural, though tarnished by rumors of tampering. For now, no one is pressing further charges, though the Corbrays remain under suspicion. The immediate threat of a trial by combat is resolved. Arya and Brienne succeeded in preventing open conflict. Brienne's fearless intervention in the High Hall is already becoming the stuff of legend. Arya's name carries weight as well. She showed them all that House Stark will not tolerate infighting among its allies. It appears the Vale will remain stable. The regents have pledged to find a distant heir if one exists, or else rule collectively until a new arrangement can be made. They also reaffirmed their friendship with the North and thanked us for sending assistance. Arya will stay a short while longer to ensure no new tensions flare, then return to Winterfell. I will continue to gather any genealogical leads, but I suspect a direct heir will be difficult to find. For the time being, the Vale is at peace. Samwell Tarly. Jon read the final words, relief surging through him. Sansa let out a soft breath, a small, tired smile on her lips. They did it. A Regency Council, unorthodox, but it might hold the Vale together until they find a suitable heir. Davos clapped his hands lightly. The realm owes your sister, Sam, and Ser Brienne a debt. This is how wars are prevented. Quiet negotiations, a bit of steel to deter hotheads, and a willingness to compromise. Jon turned toward the frosted windows, imagining Arya's triumphant grin. She had grown into a formidable force, capable of navigating dark corridors as easily as she handled a blade. He felt a swell of pride. When they return, we'll host a feast in their honor, he said. They deserve more than just gratitude. Sansa nodded. Agreed. The North needs a reason to celebrate anyway. People still live under the shadow of the last war, and a bit of hope can go a long way. They spent that evening in a rare moment of levity, sharing the news with the lords who had gathered in the great hall. A subdued but genuine applause rose at the mention of Arya's role. Cups of warm ale and mulled wine were lifted in her honor, and for once, the tension in Winterfell's air eased. Outside, snow continued to fall, but within these walls, a spark of contentment burned. Over the next week, further letters arrived from the Vale, confirming that the new regency was holding firm. Sam wrote that he planned to return to Old Town soon, unless House Stark required him elsewhere. Arya intended to remain another fortnight to ensure that no fresh accusations flared. Brienne, too, planned to linger at the Eyrie, at least until travel became too hazardous with winter's deepening snows. Both would then journey north. Jon felt a deep sense of relief, one crisis averted, but the broader realm still simmered with potential troubles. Tyrion's letters from King's Landing noted a steady, if slow, improvement in public sentiment. Daenerys was employing some of her remaining unsullied to patrol trade roads in the Crownlands, keeping them safer than they'd been in years. The small folk were rebuilding their lives under the new Queen's watch. Yet those ex-Lannister loyalists who had fled the Westerlands were rumored to be gathering in Lys, a free city in Essos, perhaps plotting a return. Tyrion suggested the Crown might soon dispatch spies or envoys to keep an eye on them. One winter afternoon, as the sun sank behind snowy hills, Jon found himself in the library tower. He was reviewing an old record of the Stark lineage, partly out of curiosity. He ran a finger along the lines of descent from Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, to later lords of Winterfell. He saw how the line meandered through centuries of births, marriages, and tragedies. Now, at the bottom, it would have ended with Robb if not for Bran, Rickon, Sansa, and Arya. And what of him? Bastard, not truly in the official line. Yet in practice, he was their brother. The old scroll didn't show that, but life often didn't fit neatly into genealogical charts. He heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Sansa entering, a candle in one hand. She glanced at the scroll, understanding immediately. "Tracing the line of the kings in the north?" she asked gently. "Something like that," Jon replied, rolling it up. "We Starks have always endured, but it's a fragile thing. If Ned hadn't returned from Robert's rebellion, or if any of 100 twists had gone differently, everything might have collapsed." She set the candle on a small table. "True enough of every house, I suppose, but we remain for now." Jon hesitated, thinking of the Targaryen side of his blood. Sometimes he wondered what that line looked like, broken, scattered, culminating in Daenerys and, by some twist of fate, him. And he had chosen to deny it. He set the scroll aside. "We remain," he echoed softly. She tilted her head, concern flickering in her gaze. "Do you regret it? Not claiming the Targaryen name?" He looked at her. "No. My loyalty was always to the north. This is where I belong. The Iron Throne is too far south, too soaked in blood. Let Daenerys handle that burden. She seems willing to try to govern justly. I don't envy her the task." Sansa studied him for a moment, then placed a hand on his arm. "Father would be proud," she said simply. "He always wanted us to remain true to ourselves. You are." The warmth of her words filled him. He smiled slightly. "Thank you, Sansa." They left the tower together, heading down to the great hall for supper. Outside, the wind howled, and snow piled in the courtyard, but Winterfell stood firm. Servants bustled about with steaming platters of roasted vegetables and salted pork, the best they could manage in winter's onset. Lords who had lingered at Winterfell for the season took their seats, conversing quietly. Jon joined them, taking his place near Sansa. Davos arrived, rubbing his hands to warm them. Others came, stamping the snow from their boots. Near the end of the meal, a guard entered, bowing low. "My lord, my lady, there's a raven from King's Landing. It bears the seal of the hand of the queen." Tyrion's seal. The faint stir of worry rippled through the hall. Jon signaled for the guard to bring the message forward. He opened it, reading in silence. Sansa watched his face anxiously. When he looked up, his eyes were troubled. Tyrion writes that Daenerys has received credible information those ex-Lannister loyalists in Lys have secured backing from a mercenary company. She fears they might attempt to land in the Westerlands, hoping to rally more rebels. She's considering dispatching forces to preempt them. She also wonders if the North would reaffirm its support in case of open conflict. She doesn't ask for troops, only a statement that we stand with the crown. Jon swallowed. She wants to make sure they know they have no chance of fracturing the realm. Davos muttered, 7 hells. So soon after we averted the Vale crisis, the realm barely has time to breathe. Sansa leaned in, voice low. What do we do? If we openly side with Daenerys, it might drive more disgruntled lords to the rebels. If we stay silent, we risk damaging our alliance with her. Jon nodded. We swore fealty. We can't break that vow lightly, but maybe we can phrase our statement carefully, emphasizing that we discourage any rebellion, that we want peace. We don't necessarily have to send armies south again. The North has suffered enough, and the snow is growing deeper. Marching south would be impractical. She agreed. Yes, we must keep to the letter of our alliance but not commit to sending men we can't spare. We'll write Tyrion, reaffirming we stand by the crown's peace. That should be enough. He read the rest of Tyrion's letter silently, gleaning that Daenerys intended to meet with her war council soon, possibly seeking a naval blockade of the Lyseni ships if they approached Westeros. Euron's old fleet was mostly gone, but the crown still had some ships, combined with the Redwyne fleet from the Reach. It might be enough to deter an invasion. Jon prayed it would be resolved without another pitched battle. The realm was too weary for more devastation. They spent the next day drafting the official response. Jon worded it plainly but firmly. The North condemned any attempt to undermine the crown or incite a new war, and stood by the rightful queen's authority. However, due to harsh winter conditions, the North could not feasibly send large forces south. The letter ended with a hopeful note that a peaceful resolution was still possible. Jon sealed it, dispatching a raven to King's Landing. The reply came swiftly, within a week, despite the foul weather. Tyrion thanked them for their support, adding that Daenerys would keep them informed. She was gathering her remaining dragons, Drogon and the younger one that had hatched from the last clutch. Rumor had it the hatchling had grown enough to be ridden soon, though no one knew by whom. The letter concluded with a simple line that made Jon's heart tighten. Her Grace asks after you, wonders if the North might one day send a delegate to help shape the future of the realm. She regrets how events have distanced you both, but understands your choice. She hopes for your continued friendship, even across the miles. Jon stared at those words for a long moment, the flickering torchlight reflecting off the parchment. Friendship. Once they had been more than that, bound by love, or so they had believed, only to discover the truth of their blood ties. He set the letter aside, not knowing how to respond. Perhaps all they could be was allies, separated by both distance and the ghosts of what once was. Soon after, the roads in the north became nearly impassable under fresh layers of snow. Patrols still ventured out, but caravans grew scarce. Winterfell settled into its winter routines, storing food, feeding the hungry among their vassals, and ensuring the castle's wards stayed warm. Jon visited the training yard regularly, practicing with the younger soldiers to keep them sharp. He sparred with them on straw mats, teaching them to defend themselves with efficiency and honor. Sansa managed the castle's internal affairs, her leadership increasingly respected by the northern lords, who saw her as a capable lady of Winterfell. Davos organized watch schedules and oversaw the forging of new weapons and tools in the smithy. Maester Wolkan tended the ravens, kept the ledgers, and handled the medical needs of the castle. Bran remained elusive, sometimes appearing with cryptic remarks that made Jon wonder how much he truly saw. Weeks passed without word from Arya. The snow was so thick that ravens likely had difficulty crossing the mountains. Jon often wondered where she was, if she had already started back and been delayed by storms. He reassured himself that Arya, Sam, and Brienne were safe, likely hunkered down somewhere in the Vale until the passes cleared. He reminded himself that no news might simply mean no disaster had struck. Late one evening, the watch atop Winterfell's walls announced incoming riders. Jon went out to the courtyard, bracing against the bitter cold as the portcullis rose. Through the swirling snow emerged a small party on horseback. At the head rode a familiar figure in dark leathers, Arya Stark. Beside her towered Brienne of Tarth, her armor rimed with ice. Behind them were half a dozen men carrying flickering torches. Jon strode forward, relief flooding him. Arya dismounted first, handing her reins to a stable boy. She clapped Jon's arm in greeting, her face flushed from the cold, eyes bright. "Gods, it's good to be back," she said, exhaling a cloud of steam. "The roads were murder, but we made it. I thought we'd be stuck in some half-frozen inn for the rest of the winter." Brienne bowed her head to Jon. "My lord, we came as soon as the passes were deemed passable." Jon gripped her forearm. "I'm glad you've both returned safely. Come inside, both of you, get warm. We've had no word for weeks." Arya laughed, shaking snow from her cloak. "Ravens can't fly through blizzards, apparently. I could barely ride a horse through them, let alone fly." She glanced around, breathing in the familiar sights of Winterfell's courtyard. "Feels good to be home." Servants guided the travelers inside to warm chambers and hot food. Jon and Arya walked together through the corridors, while Brienne saw to the horses and her men. Arya's limp, slight but noticeable after her many battles, became a bit more pronounced in the cold, but she paid it no mind. She recounted how they'd stayed in the Eyrie for a while after the Regency was formed, ensuring no last-minute rebellion. Then they'd tried to depart, only to be turned back by heavy snowfall. Finally, a brief break in the weather let them make the trek to Winterfell. Sam had gone on to Old Town, confident that peace was holding. In the great hall, they found Sansa waiting by the hearth, a look of intense relief on her face. She rushed to embrace Arya, who accepted the hug with a small grin. "You look well, sister," Arya murmured. Sansa smiled. "And you look half-frozen." Arya rolled her eyes affectionately. "A small price to pay. The Vale is more or less stable now. No open fights. The regents are figuring out how to handle the day-to-day. Sam said they might even hold a small tournament come spring to boost morale." Sansa offered Arya a seat at the head table, then signaled a servant. "We'll have mulled wine and hot soup brought immediately." She turned to Brienne, who had just entered, stamping snow from her boots. "Sir Brienne, please sit as well. You've both done us a great service." Brienne removed her cloak, revealing the battered plate beneath. She bowed her head respectfully. "It was my honor to serve House Stark." Warm soup and spiced wine appeared swiftly. Arya tucked in with ravenous hunger. Jon and Sansa sat beside her, letting her talk at her own pace. She described the final negotiations, the scowls on certain lords' faces, the grudging respect from others. She chuckled at how Sam had carefully read genealogies to them by candlelight, explaining line after line, until the lords practically begged for a simpler compromise. She also credited Brienne's presence for keeping the hot-headed knights from drawing steel. They saw what she did when two of them tried to duel in the High Hall. She disarmed them in a heartbeat, Arya said proudly. "Made them think twice." Brienne lowered her gaze modestly. "I only did what was necessary to prevent bloodshed." Sansa's eyes shone with admiration. "You've both done far more than that. You've saved the Vale from a war, and that saves countless northern lives as well." "Thank you." Arya shrugged, sipping her wine. "I suppose so, but it's done now. I'm home." She looked at Jon. "Any new crises we should worry about? Has Daenerys decided to burn down another city?" Jon's features tightened slightly. "Not yet. She's been dealing with potential rebels in Lys. We pledged our loyalty by letter, but we're not sending troops." Arya studied his face, nodding. "Probably for the best. The North can't handle another expedition south. Not in this weather. And frankly, we've done enough fighting. Let the rest of the realm figure itself out." They talked late into the evening, the fire crackling, pushing back the winter chill. At last, Sansa arranged chambers for Arya and Brienne near the main keep. Jon found himself retiring to his own chambers, the weight of worry slowly lifting from his shoulders. The next morning, the entire castle seemed in better spirits, as though Arya's return signaled a turning of the tide. She was seen strolling the corridors, greeting old acquaintances, even sparring in the courtyard with the younger guards to loosen her stiff muscles. Winter continued its slow, relentless advance, but inside Winterfell, a measure of warmth persisted. The quiet that followed was a welcome respite. Days turned to weeks, the snow rose higher, and the nights grew long and dark. The northern lights danced occasionally in the sky, shimmering curtains of green and purple that left onlookers in hushed awe. Jon took solace in the routine, training men, managing supplies, reading the occasional raven from King's Landing or the Vale. Tyrion's letters described Daenerys's preemptive measures against the Lyseni plot. A few Lyseni ships had approached the Westerland's coast but were driven back by a combined fleet from the Reach and the Crownlands. It seemed the rebels had lost their main chance to spark an uprising. The tensions were not fully gone, but the immediate threat subsided. "Her Grace remains vigilant," Tyrion wrote, "yet she is hopeful this will fizzle into nothing more than a footnote in history." No mention of summoning Jon South, no new demands. Jon was quietly grateful. He felt he had done enough. The North had done enough. Let the realm find its balance without them wading into another war. Through the darkest stretch of winter, Winterfell endured. Food was rationed carefully, but no one starved. The lords who had stayed behind for the season found themselves passing the time with games of Syvass or sharing stories in the hall. Occasionally, they'd stage small boar hunts outside the castle, but these became rarer as snowdrifts rose chest-high. During those weeks, Jon sometimes found himself sitting with Arya near the hearth, recollecting old memories of their childhood. How she'd always wanted to spar, how they'd thrown snowballs from the ramparts with Robb. They remembered how cold Catelyn's eyes had been toward Jon, how he'd tried to avoid her gaze. It felt like a different life, overshadowed by wars and secrets. Yet in these quiet moments, the siblings found some measure of peace in reflecting on how far they'd come. Sansa, too, would join them sometimes, or share a pot of tea with them in the library, discussing the realm's new shape. She speculated on whether Daenerys would attempt to form a royal alliance through marriage with some other great house, or if she would remain alone on the throne. She wondered if the North might gain more autonomy in the future, once trust was further established. "We're a part of the Seven Kingdoms, but we're also distinct," she mused one evening, warming her hands around a teacup. "Maybe that distinction will lead to a new arrangement one day, something more akin to a confederation of realms, rather than a single realm under a single throne." Jon listened with interest, though he rarely felt a burning desire to shape the future in that way. He was content to ensure his people were safe, that the crops grew, that families had roofs over their heads. Let the grand designs of politics unfold as they would. Nevertheless, he admired Sansa's vision, her determination to steer the North toward a more secure place in any future the realm might have. The hardest days of winter wore on. Bran occasionally mentioned glimpses he had in his visions, whispers of the children of the forest, or the memory of the wall. He said little about the realm's future, only that time moved like a river, sometimes branching. Jon took it as cryptic reassurance that no new apocalypse loomed. At last, the first hints of spring touched the edges of Westeros. The sun lingered a bit longer in the sky, the snow melted enough to reveal patches of muddy ground, and the bitter winds eased slightly. Cautiously, Winterfell's staff began to speak of sowing seeds for the next harvest. Once the land dried and thawed enough, Jon oversaw the distribution of fresh tools to farmers in outlying villages, ensuring that once the weather turned, they'd be ready. A few ravens arrived from the Vale, bearing news that the Regency Council was functioning well. The roads across the mountains had been maintained, and the Vale's harvest from its sheltered valleys had kept them fed. No new violence had erupted since the settlement. Sam had written from Old Town, saying he was proud that the Vale crisis had been averted and that he was returning to his studies, albeit ready to serve again if needed. Meanwhile, Tyrion's letters spoke of minor skirmishes off the coast, but no major threat. Daenerys was devoting much of her energy to solidifying laws that prevented the worst abuses by regional lords, especially in the Reach and the Stormlands, where war had ravaged entire populations. She was also rumored to be considering an expedition to the shattered lands of Essos to see if she could reclaim any loyalty. But that was still in the realm of rumor. As the snows receded further, the north welcomed a new, tentative warmth. The day came when travelers began trickling in again from the south, merchants hoping to renew trade or sell goods. Jon arranged to host a small feast in Winterfell to celebrate the changing season. A battered band of minstrels arrived, playing sprightly tunes that lightened the hearts of guards and small folk alike. The great hall filled with laughter, the smell of roasted boar, and the hum of conversation. Sansa presided over the head table, gracious and poised. Arya circulated among the guests, more comfortable moving about than sitting still. Davos joined a knot of older lords in a corner, regaling them with stories of his smuggling days. Even Bran was wheeled in for a time, though he mostly sat in silent observation. Jon took a seat at Sansa's side, quietly enjoying the chatter, greeting travelers who came forward to pay respects. A hush fell when the main doors opened and in strode Tyrion Lannister, flanked by a pair of guards wearing the dragon sigil. The hall stirred with surprise. Tyrion was announced by a herald, Lord Tyrion Lannister, Hand of the Queen. Heads turned, and whispers erupted. It was not common for the Queen's hand to appear unannounced in Winterfell. Jon rose, stepping around the table, a mix of confusion and curiosity swirling in him. Tyrion approached, bowing with exaggerated courtesy. "My Lord Jon Snow, Lady Sansa Stark," he said, voice carrying that familiar wry edge. "I apologize for arriving without forewarning. The roads north are not known for their raven-friendly conditions." Sansa exchanged a look with Jon, then inclined her head to Tyrion. "Lord Tyrion, you're welcome here, of course. This is quite a surprise. Have you traveled far alone?" Tyrion gestured at his guards. "I have a small escort, enough to keep bandits at bay. The Queen permitted me some freedom of movement. I came because, well, sometimes one must speak face to face, not through letters. May I?" Jon nodded. "Of course. Join us." The tension in the hall relaxed slightly as Tyrion moved forward. The music resumed tentatively, and people returned to their cups, though many eyes remained on the dwarf. Tyrion accepted a cup of wine from a servant, downing a deep swallow before he spoke quietly to Jon and Sansa. "I had to see for myself how Winterfell fares in this early thaw, and to deliver a message from Daenerys personally." Jon's stomach tightened. "A message? Why not a raven?" Tyrion gave a wan smile. "Because it's not a simple request that can be resolved by parchment. Her Grace has stabilized King's Landing, the Westerlands, and much of the realm. But she's aware that she cannot rule by force alone. She wants to form a grand council, a gathering of all great houses, to discuss a new code of laws, one that cements the realm's peace and clarifies each region's rights and obligations." He paused, swirling his wine. "She specifically requests that a Stark attend in person. She would prefer, well, she mentioned your name, Jon. But if that's not acceptable, Lady Sansa would do as well. Perhaps both of you." A hush fell around them, despite the noise of the hall. Sansa folded her hands, her expression unreadable. Jon felt a mixture of apprehension and something like inevitability. "A grand council," he repeated. "She wants to rewrite the realm's laws?" Tyrion nodded. "Not entirely, but she wants to ensure the monarchy is not absolute, that there are checks, something akin to what your father Ned Stark once dreamed of, perhaps. She also believes each region should have a say in how taxes and levies are decided, so that the disasters of the past few years aren't repeated. She hopes this will unify the lords under a sense of collective governance. She calls it breaking the wheel in a more civilized way." Sansa arched a brow. "That's ambitious." Tyrion exhaled. "Yes, and it will fail if the great lords refuse to come. The Vale is likely to send someone from its new Regency Council. The Riverlands have mostly recovered under Edmure Tully's mild leadership. The Reach is still reorganizing, but they'll attend. The Stormlands are an open question. Dorne remains distant, but the Queen insists the North is the most crucial piece. If you refuse, others may do the same. If you attend, you lend legitimacy to the council. Jon felt his pulse thud in his temples. And what if we don't attend? Tyrion's gaze was steady. Then the council proceeds without you, but the North loses its voice. You remain part of the realm by the treaty you signed, so the decisions made there would still affect you. Surely you'd rather have a say. Arya, who had come up behind them, interjected. We have no desire to get tangled in southern politics. That's precisely why Jon left that Iron Throne to Daenerys in the first place. Tyrion inclined his head. I understand, truly, but avoiding southern politics won't stop southern politics from affecting you. If new laws are made regarding trade, taxes, or obligations for the defense of the realm, the North can't hide behind its snowdrifts. Not forever. Sansa and Jon exchanged a weighted look. Then Sansa spoke quietly. We'll need time to discuss this. Tyrion nodded. Of course, I won't push for an immediate answer. We can speak more privately later. For now, allow me to enjoy your hospitality. I haven't tasted northern fare in quite some time. Jon forced a polite smile. Welcome to Winterfell, Tyrion. We'll talk soon. Tyrion bowed and moved to find a seat, accompanied by the watchful eyes of his two guards. The hall gradually resumed its revelry, though now under a shadow of uncertainty. Sansa exchanged few words with Jon, but her expression told him what he already felt. They were being pulled south yet again, tethered by alliances and the unstoppable force of the realm's politics. That night, after the feast ended, Jon, Sansa, and Arya gathered in the solar with Tyrion and Davos. Brienne stood guard outside the door, ensuring privacy. Tyrion explained in greater detail what Daenerys envisioned. A grand council in the Dragon Pit of King's Landing, with representatives from every major region, plus some minor lords who had distinguished themselves. The goal was to discuss a set of proposals that would shape the monarchy's power, the rights of lords and small folk, the administration of justice, and more. Daenerys wanted to ensure no future king or queen could repeat the horrors of her father's reign or the devastation of the war for the throne. Jon listened intently. The idea was noble in theory. He recalled how Daenerys had once spoken of breaking the wheel. Now, she was attempting to do so through law and consensus rather than dragonfire. But the prospect of leaving the North, traveling to King's Landing, sitting in the Dragon Pit, he could already feel the weight of it pressing on him. Tyrion finished his explanation with a dry smile. You see why she sent me in person. Convincing you through a letter would have been difficult. Sansa was thoughtful. When does she plan to hold this council? In a few months' time, when travel is easier. She wants to give lords ample opportunity to make the journey once spring is more certain. She asked me to head north early, to ensure you had time to prepare, or to refuse if that's your choice. Davos spoke softly. And if we refuse, the realm might see that as a sign the North is not truly committed to the crown. Arya made a faint noise of frustration. We swore loyalty, but that doesn't mean we have to jump every time they snap their fingers. Tyrion raised a hand. I understand the sentiment, Lady Arya, but this is a chance to shape the laws that will govern the North as well. If you don't attend, you'll find yourself subject to decisions made by others, some of whom may not have the North's best interests at heart. Jon let out a long breath. It's not an easy decision. The North is weary of war, of politics. We were hoping to rebuild quietly. Tyrion's voice was surprisingly gentle. I know, but the realm is forging a new path, and if you stay silent, you might find that path diverges from what's best for your people. Daenerys genuinely wants to create a fairer system. She's learned from her mistakes. Your counsel would help guide her, and everyone else, away from repeating the past. Sansa tapped her fingers on the table. We'll need time to discuss it, to consult our lords, see how feasible it is to travel. We might propose sending just 1 or 2 representatives, not half the North. Tyrion nodded. That would be acceptable. The Queen isn't asking for a large retinue, just enough to show the North's official presence and willingness to participate. Jon exchanged a look with Sansa, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. He still remembered King's Landing's rubble, the screams, the smell of ash. He remembered standing before Daenerys, tasting betrayal and heartbreak in equal measure. Yet the notion of her now seeking to transform the monarchy into something less cruel stirred a strange mix of relief and curiosity. Could it truly be done? Could the realm find a lasting peace through laws instead of swords? They concluded that they would give Tyrion a preliminary answer within a fortnight. Tyrion would remain in Winterfell as a guest while they decided. He seemed content to enjoy the North's hospitality, even if he kept his wine cup carefully measured these days. The next morning, he strolled the castle grounds, greeting old acquaintances, even visiting the library tower to see if any rare books might amuse him. Meanwhile, Jon and Sansa called a gathering of northern lords who were present or near enough to travel. They explained the invitation: a grand council in King's Landing to redefine the laws of the Seven Kingdoms. The lords reacted with a blend of skepticism, curiosity, and caution. Some, like Lord Glover, grumbled about southern intrigues. Others, like Lady Dustin, sneered at the idea of southern laws. But a few saw opportunity, reasoning that if the North participated, it could secure favorable terms for trade and governance, ensuring the crown recognized the North's unique customs. Arya spoke out more bluntly: "We can't hide in the snow forever, wishing the rest of the realm would leave us alone. If we truly want no more wars, we have to be part of shaping what comes next." Sansa's voice was calm as she listened to each perspective. Finally, she proposed sending a small delegation: herself, Jon, and perhaps one or two trusted advisors. That way, the North would be heard but wouldn't weaken its defenses by sending a large party. Most of the lords seemed content with that compromise, though none were eager to make the journey themselves. After the meeting, Jon and Sansa conferred in private. She sipped tea, gazing out a narrow window. "I think we should go," she said at last. "Much as it pains me to leave Winterfell again, we can't afford to let others decide the realm's future without our voice. We can insist on protections for the North, or even special provisions recognizing our culture. If we're not there, who will speak for us?" Jon drummed his fingers on the table, remembering Daenerys's last words to him. "All right," he said, finally exhaling. "We'll go. It may only be for a few weeks or months, and hopefully we'll return without more bloodshed." She nodded, relief in her eyes. "We'll need to prepare. If the council is in a few months, we can set out once the roads are clear enough. We should bring Davos, he's wise and a good negotiator. Perhaps Brienne as well, to ensure our safety, and because she's proven to be an impartial knight who commands respect." Jon agreed. "And Arya?" Sansa hesitated. "She might want to come, but I suspect she'll say she's had enough of King's Landing. Let's speak with her. If she prefers to stay here, she can help oversee Winterfell in our absence. Bran is a special case. He might come or he might stay. He sees things differently, but it might be best if he remains in the North." They informed Tyrion of their decision. The dwarf seemed genuinely pleased, raising his wine cup in a small toast. "I'm relieved," he said, "though I didn't doubt you'd see the value in attending. The Queen will be grateful, and so will the rest of the realm, I suspect." Arya, upon hearing their plan, wrinkled her nose. "I'll stay. I've no desire to sit in the dragon pit and watch lords argue. Besides, Winterfell needs someone to keep an eye on things. With both of you gone, I'll ensure no one grows too ambitious." Jon patted her shoulder. "I'm grateful for it. Keep them in line, little sister." So the preparations began. Over the next weeks, as the snow melted further, they assembled a modest retinue: a dozen guards, a few attendants, Davos, Brienne, and a pair of maids for Sansa. The plan was to leave once the roads were reliably passable, in about a month's time. Tyrion bided his days in Winterfell, occasionally offering tips on how best to approach certain southern lords who might attend the council. The mood in the castle was a blend of anticipation and wariness. Arya, in her typical fashion, teased Jon about returning to King's Landing. "Don't lose your head," she quipped one morning. "The capital has a habit of devouring good men." Jon tried to smile. I'll do my best. When the departure day finally arrived, Winterfell's courtyard bustled with activity. Horses were saddled, wagons packed with supplies and gifts to present at the council, banners folded for the journey. Sansa oversaw the final loading, ensuring they hadn't forgotten any essential items. Jon donned his warmest traveling cloak and checked his sword, Longclaw, strapped securely at his side. Ghost lingered near him, ears perked. Jon knelt, stroking the direwolf's fur. "I'll be gone a while, boy," he murmured. "Stay here with Arya. Protect Winterfell." Ghost tilted his head, intelligent red eyes gazing back. Jon felt a pang of guilt leaving him behind, but the South was no place for a direwolf of his size, and besides, Winterfell needed its guardian. Arya stood by the main gate, arms folded. She gave Jon and Sansa each a long look. "Come back quickly," she said. "I've no desire to rule Winterfell in your absence longer than necessary." Sansa smiled, embracing her briefly. "We'll do our best." Davos, Brienne, and Tyrion mounted their horses, forming around Jon and Sansa. A small cheer went up from the guards left behind, while the retinue of 12 soldiers in Stark livery moved into formation. With a final glance at Winterfell's gray walls, Jon spurred his horse forward, Sansa at his side. The gates opened, revealing a winding road still muddy from melted snow, but passable. They set out toward the south, the chill wind at their backs. Jon looked over his shoulder just once, seeing Arya in the gateway, a faint silhouette in the early morning light. Then he turned his gaze ahead, toward a realm that awaited their presence, a future that might be shaped, this time not by the clash of swords, but by words and alliances. He felt that old mix of apprehension and resolve. He was Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, who had turned from the Targaryen name for the sake of the North. And now, once again, he stepped onto a path that might decide the fate of kingdoms. As they rode away, a light breeze carried the promise of spring. Above them, the sky stretched wide and pale, and the land lay open, waiting for whatever seeds of change might yet take root.